and welcome one and all to probably the biggest spotlight that I have ever done. One I've been chasing for, I've got this wall behind me, Dean, of people that I've done interviews with. I've done The Running Man, I did Mr. Moon, Silo, if you remember Silo, who's doing the airsoft stuff back in the day. But other than Frankie on PC, there's no other biggest name associated with DayZ than the one, the only Dean Rocket Hall. Mate, how are you? Thank you so much for being here.
Cool. Wow. No pressure with that intro. I'm good. Yeah. No. Excited. It's definitely fun to chat. So
it is. There's arguably no one. There is no one else bigger. You're the guy who created the bloody game that so many people have built careers around, and not just talking about content creators, but other games that have spun off from it. And you constantly see these articles that talk about the most influential games in the last decade, in the last 20 years. And if DayZ is not on that list, then I don't know what that person's thinking, because it's up there with the likes of Gary's Mod and Minecraft as one of the most influential games to come out of it. And the creation story that most people watching this would be aware of is as much part of the lore about how you came up with the idea for the game back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'm kind of philosophical about it a bit. I think it's dangerous in game development to get a bit too big in your head about it. So I think I like to think that I was there when the folder was created, right? When DayZ folder was so you're there at that gestation, at that point when it was first created. Mm-hmm. And but since then many people have worked on it, so it's I can't take credit for that, but that's the cool part of definitely game development and being involved with something like this. Is there was a moment in time when I needed to make a folder and I named it, and so you're there at the point when something can be made or created, and I think that's the dream, I suppose. Yeah.
And to have a legacy like that, it's got to make you feel good. Like I know the early days of DayZ Standalone in particular was, for those who were around then, there was a lot of criticism of not just yourself, but of Bohemia and the game. And early access was a relatively new phenomena, and you guys kind of almost wrote the handbook on being able to do an early access project and then learn a lot from what, because I don't think there'd been a title as big as DayZ going to early access at that stage, had there?
No, they hadn't. So the Steam greenlight process was kind of, Valve had recognized that it wasn't wasn't moving forward. Valve were actually really cool. Work with them quite a lot with DayZ. There was actually a moment in time when we were discussing. Remember the whole paid mods controversy? Yep. I was actually talking with Valve about either DayZ or Arma and how that would factor into it. But they were pretty deep on the path of working with Bethesda, and I definitely. People will criticize Bohemia a lot, but I think all the way to the top, up to and including Marek, they do really understand modding, perhaps better than I think personally almost any other company. I think they truly understand. Marek certainly truly understands modding and its potential, which is cool.
It's interesting you say that, because it's something we've talked on the DayZ podcast a lot about. One of the big criticisms to this day you still see about DayZ is, if it wasn't for modders, the game wouldn't exist. And the comeback I've had to many of them is, and that's kind of always been Bohemia's model. They'll make a base game and then allow modders to expand on that. And usually those mods that the modding community creates is what takes those games to new heights. The Epoch mod for Arma, then there's all these DLC packs they've got at the moment, and then of course DayZ. It's what I don't understand how it's a criticism. You can argue about some of the ethics regarding monetization of some of those mods, which can be quite difficult to do through DayZ. And you touched on the whole drama with the Steam monetization in Skyrim back in the day, which almost caused a the collapse of modern society as we know it, if you remember that. But I don't understand why BI's model is viewed so negatively. There are issues about it, but it's a great model. It allows the community to take a base game and do what they want with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was sad when Valve just backed out of doing paid mods rather than reworking it. I look at games like City Skylines or RimWorld, where I have favorite mod creators who make mods and then post their Patreons or stuff like that. I certainly am very supportive of the idea of modders making money. Definitely we have a commitment to the studio that all the games we make, we try and make them moddable from here on. Certainly we've had, it can be very expensive to retrofit it in, which is unfortunate, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have anything that I have if it wasn't for modding. I still mod games a lot all the time. I find it, you get to look inside someone's data structure and see how they made the game without having to make the game. You know, it's years and years and years of work to make a game, especially if you want to make one with a new data structure. So by modding someone's game, you get to see the lessons, the good and the bad, from their data structure without having to put all the investment in. So you know, there's a lot I really like about how, say, Paradox's games are modded. There's a lot I like about KSP's modding. There's a lot I like about RimWorld and stuff like that. So I find modding a really great way as a developer of looking into games as well.
So a question I have to ask here then, otherwise my community would crucify me. Are there any DayZ mods out there designed by Dean Hall under a pen name?
No, I don't do pen names. And honestly, it's been that way since since I was a kid. I've always had an opinion that people should be able to go and find out who I am, and that who I am online should just be a representation of who I am. It's only really over the last wee while, as I think sometimes our the internet in general has become a lot more antisocial. I've occasionally wondered maybe I should release games under a pseudonym or something. But yeah, so no, if there's a mod, then it'll be a mod that I've made. Yeah.
Damn it. Although I think there's probably going to be some people trawling through the because you didn't actually say no, you haven't made a mod for DayZ, so I imagine there'll be some people trawling through looking for, is there a rocket mod?
So that I have an unreleased plugin I made for Arma 3 actually that allowed you to use, you know, all the flight sim peripherals.
Yep.
That actually made those work for Arma 3. So I should have finished that off and released it. So that was the last amount of C++ work I did myself. So I wrote a plugin that, it was pretty cool. So all the dials and all that for flight sim, because I'm a big flight simmer, work for that. And I also made a mission for Arma 3 that I haven't released, that I probably should have. So I made a couple of popular co-op missions pre-DayZ actually for Arma, and those were how I got the job at Bohemia actually.
Yep.
Was through that. I think one of mine was one of the top 10, because I really focused on, and I still really like that 8-player co-op. I think is great, which is, I think that sort of 4 to 8 player range is also what's great to play as a party in a game like DayZ and stuff as well. You've got enough people that if someone goes down, you can recover from it, at the same time as not too many people that it's too difficult to organize. So
yep. Now, I'm going to start getting into the questions and that we've got now. So we sort of talked about this a little bit just then, but reflecting on the past decade, what are the most memorable moments for you in the journey of creating DayZ Standalone, even though you're no longer involved with the project?
I mean, an easy answer is, so I'd been working on DayZ while I was in the army, and it happened when I was injured, playing soldier, I guess, but on my training in Singapore while I was in their jungle training in Brunei. So I had a lot of downtime and a lot of recovery, and I was doing most of that recovery in a hotel in Singapore.
And that's crazy, that the injury you suffered there. Like, having been in the military myself and I did a basic survival course, but to the damage done to your body was kind of scary when you look into it.
Yep, but that's not unusual. And actually, we have a bit of a problem with it in New Zealand. A lot of soldiers injured on training, and we don't kind of have the infrastructure that America has in terms of veteran affairs and all that kind of stuff like that. So it's unfortunately quite common. We also lose a lot of soldiers in training accidents, as well. So so it unfortunately wasn't unusual. The army actually ended up being pretty good about it. I think my mum emailed or phoned the chief of army and gave him an earful when I got injured at the time, because they were going to fly me.
I'm sorry, I'm just imagining you go, "Mum, you did it! Oh my, the shame!"
I remember when I got back from Brunei to Singapore, and the defence attaché had come in, and the defence attaché, by pure chance, had been my officer commanding when I did my Air Force officer training, because I was in the Air Force. I got out and then I joined the army. So here, like, I don't know, 10 years later or something, here's my old commandant from my officer training is the defence attaché, and he looked at me, and I knew I mustn't look very good, because when someone looks at you and they look deeply concerned, and then it makes you really concerned. I don't think I was worried until I saw his reaction, and then I was like, okay, maybe I need to be worried here. But yeah, the recovery was pretty bad, and especially in Singapore, they're very anti-drugs and stuff, so they were not giving me a lot of painkillers. I later on found out in New Zealand that if I'd had the operation in New Zealand, they would have had me doped to the gills for a long time. But maybe that was better in hindsight. I don't know. You
also, when you tell that story about
sorry, I realized that I didn't actually answer your question. I went on a tangent. So the coolest moment for me was probably when I'd gone to work at Bohemia, because I went to work there because the army had medically downgraded me. Even though I'd recovered, they had downgraded me, and because of what I was doing, I really, my goals, I couldn't be medically downgraded. I needed that top tier medical. Everything else was fine. I set a record for the operational fitness test in my regiment. Like I was doing great. It was just I needed the doctors to sign off. And so I took a leave of absence and went over to the Czech Republic to work on Armour 3. And while I was there, I'd checked I'd wanted to continue working on my mod, and I said, could I release the mod on the forums? Because now I had the little Bohemia badge on the forum, so I was like, one of the team. And they were like, yeah, that's fine. And I remember I was getting ready to release it, and I just started talking with Dyslexy. I presume you know Dyslexy from Shack Tech, the armor.
I've heard the name, yep.
So I'd been talking to him about my plans for a large-scale multiplayer in Armour 3, because that was what I was hired to do, and I'd been developing this very cool tool. But Armour 3, during development there, was very broken in multiplayer, so I didn't really have a lot to do in it. It was essentially crashing whenever I tried to host a game, so I couldn't really test much. And so I'd had this planned practice test with Dyslexy, and I think he'd been over in the Czech Republic. And I said to him, hey, I've been working on this mod. Are you guys, you want to check it out? And I think maybe Shack Tech were just a bit bored, and he's like, yeah, we'll give it a run. And so we booted it up with like 60 of them, I think. And it was at that moment that I knew, I knew just from everyone's reaction that it was going to be a thing. I didn't know how big it was going to be, but I knew that there was something very special there. And that became, I think it's at the CH Kilroy or something, whatever, the videos, I've forgotten the name of them now, but they were a series of videos produced by one of the Shack Tech members of that first DayZ playthrough. That was when I knew it was going to be huge. And then, so that was probably the most memorable moment.
Are
The
you still
set,
in contact with a lot of the team from back then? We've had Matt Lightfoot on the show, and he was absolutely brilliant to have on to find out some of that original lore about the game and the creation of DayZ.
Not really. I'm not a big believer. I don't believe in hellos or goodbyes. I'm sort of like Murphy in Interstellar. It's like time's like a. So I don't. I focus pretty much entirely on making games. So I haven't really caught up with a lot of people, to be honest.
Yeah.
Occasionally I catch up with Marek. I'm actually going over to the Czech Republic to speak at their game conference at the end of this year. So hopefully I'll catch up with some of the Bohemia crew proper then. I caught up with Brendan Green. I caught up with Brendan Green occasionally.
Yep.
At some game conventions. I do occasionally. I think since COVID, though, my crippling social anxiety has gotten worse, so I don't tend to do a lot of stuff at all, social stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so a quick anecdote I want to throw in there. You talked about your mum. When you shared a bit about the creation of DayZ and the lore behind it, and finding out that your brother is a virologist. Now, I don't know if there's any other Hall children in the family, but your mum and dad must be so proud of what their kids have achieved. Like, one who's a world-renowned game developer, one who's if he's into that sort of stuff, a highly skilled. I don't even know what the correct title for him would be. He's
virologist, I believe.
He's a bit above a doctor, but yeah, virologist. Because I loved the information when I was able to find the stuff on it, talking about your idea around the original lore. You didn't just want to be able to go zombies, magic. That's going to happen. You actually searched for a reason why these infected were there, and that was brilliant that you were able to have a brother in the family and sit down and explore all those options with the rage style virus.
Yeah, I wish we had more time on that. There was a lot we wanted to do in that regard, but there was a lot of worry, especially from my standpoint, that we wouldn't be able to meet the moment, because I knew that we needed to meet the moment to be able to make money to make more games. And if I wanted to be able to do that, we needed to be successful. And there was things like the War Z, and then later H1Z1, and stuff like that. And so there was a real worry that that we weren't going to be able to pull it through. So there were just a lot of cool ideas that had to be thrown to the side to be able to meet the moment. Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of the competitors, emulators, whatever the people want to call them, that were around at the time of DayZ, which kind of segues nicely into the next question, in that DayZ has had a significant impact on the survival genre. Arguably, you could almost say it sort of defined it. How do you feel about the game's legacy and its influence on the gaming industry now?
So I think PewDiePie did a video where he called me like the grandfather of the battle royale genre or something, which is pretty cool because now I have little kids yell at it occasionally. Actually, I've been playing a heap of Foxhole recently again. Have you played Foxhole?
No.
And actually someone last night I was playing and there's voice chat in it, and I was talking with someone, and my name's Rocket, and this guy goes, "Are you Rocket Two Guns?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Does this person know me?" Then I was like, "Oh, do I know you?" And they're like, "No, I know who you are." They recognized my voice and my username, I guess. So that was funny. Yeah. So so I'm trying to think. I've kind of got a tangent off your question there. What was the question again?
That is part of the course with me, and anything I do, we go off on tangents, so don't feel bad about it at all. You're talking about the legacy that DayZ has had on the survival gaming genre.
I mean, I always think of that quote from Carl Sagan, if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. So I think it's really hard to look at an individual game and say this game is the whatever, because they're all incrementally building on something else. But I think that it was cool, for example, playing Ark and going, hey, that's You know, the little UI indicators look like the UI indicators that that I would have, you know, that I was using in DayZ. And I remember making those, and I kind of just did them because I just wanted something, and I wanted something simple. So, you know, every now and then I'll meet a developer or see a game and be like, okay, well, that was clearly inspired by something. And, you know, I've had a few Gary Newman from you know, Rust and Gary's Mod has joked at me a few times. I think when we were getting ready to release Icarus, I think he tweeted me and joked, "Oh, cool, another game that I can copy or something." I love Gary's humor is just incredible. Definitely a bit of an acquired taste, I think, for some people. But yeah, no, he's good value. So look, I think legacy is such a hilarious word. I think I think that it timed a moment right. I think there was just a point in time when that kind of game was going to be born, and I think I was sort of lucky enough to be there. That's what I mean. I think the coolest moment was knowing that there was a time when I was sitting at my laptop in Waiouru, which is the middle of nowhere, like desert training facility, alpine desert in New Zealand, and I'm, you know, coding using a 4G dongle, and they were pretty new back then, 4G dongles. I had to buy multiple of them because they didn't have enough data on them. And yeah, there was a moment when I was like, what do I need to call this thing that I wanted to make? And with Armour, it always worked better if you had an acronym, you know, like the Acre mods or ACE mod or stuff
Epoch.
like that, Epoch. So, you know, I was looking for something that was 3 to 5 letters for a good PBO, and that's when I was like, you know, DayZ, I'll go with that.
But we have to solve this argument: DayZ or DayZ?
So, you know, being the military guy I am, and New Zealand being an associate member, I think, of NATO, I'm afraid I use the American pronunciation, NATO standard, so it's DayZ. Yeah, I get asked that question a lot by journalists. I think it's one of the first things. Usually the British journalists, they look a little bit sad when they find out, even though I'm from a Commonwealth country, no, NATO standard. But I'm a former signals officer, so clarity in radio communications is very important to me. I'm one of those people who rages whenever someone says repeat in a game like Foxhole or DayZ or Armour or something.
For those who don't understand why Dean rages about that, repeat is generally only used for fire missions. It's a big no-no to say repeat. You usually say again, but repeat or big no-no. And those in the know will... Yeah, some things are hard to get out of the system. You can, what do they say? You can take the boy out of the army, but you can't take the army out of the boy, Dean.
Especially as a signals officer, if you ever said repeat, and you weren't meaning for someone to fire some artillery rounds on the last position, then you'd be expected to. That's an unforgivable.
Yes.
That or losing a radio. Those are the two things you can't do.
I lost a set of PAS-5 NVGs back in the mid-90s when they were still very high-tech. We found them, but there was a lot of kerfuffle. Basically, the clips broke on my webbing belt, and the whole pouch that they were in fell off. And
I don't think there was a... I remember the gas slug from the end of a Steyr AUG. Got lost, and we were looking for it. It is in the middle of nowhere as well. And we ended up finding it.
They're tiny people. That's the good.
They're like about that big, you know, like and trying to find that in the middle of like a kilometer of bush, but we found it by some bizarre. But God, it was awful.
And that's the difference between the Australian and New Zealand military compared to militaries like America, where it's just like, don't worry about it, mate. Here's another one. Australia and New Zealand don't have a lot of stuff to back up in supplies.
I think it's to do with firearms laws mostly. You know, you can't leave parts of a firearm. But I know the Americans will do it for a radio. You lose a radio. Call out
a lot of codes and stuff like that sometimes built into them, frequencies, and you got to be careful with that. Can you share some insights in your decision to leave DayZ and what inspired you to take the step to start your own company? Like the memorable tweet, which I think you still have pinned to your Twitter, I'm off to climb Everest, is probably one of the most mic drop moments of I'm off, guys. Have fun, sort of thing. And we've got another question coming up about Everest later, but
so I remember when DayZ kicked off, I think my first royalty payment was like, $5 million or something. It was a lot of money. And I remember that when I got it, my reaction was not what I was expecting. It was kind of more an inconvenience. I remember I hadn't told the bank it was coming in the Czech Republic, and I think I accidentally had like a children's account or something. I had some like ridiculous, because it's not like I had much money. I think the currency conversion between New Zealand and the Czech Republic was very bad, and I was on a very low wage as it was. So it was just sort of a tiny amount of money. And so all this money got deposited there, and I hadn't had the time to let the bank know. And the police turned up. The police turned up at the bank, and the bank there called me, and they said, you have to come down to the bank right now, or they're going to confiscate all this money. They need to see some documentation, because it was a whole bunch of anti-terror laws and stuff like that. Anyway, going through all that process, I was like, well, what do I want to do? I didn't really want to buy any property because it's just a pain. It's just annoying. And I was like, well, what do I want to do? And I'd always been really into climbing, but we were not a wealthy family, so it was pretty limited stuff I could do climbing. And I was like, well, I always really wanted to climb Mount Everest. It was something that used to be real to me when I was 14 or 15 or whatever. And so it was kind of like, I was like, well, maybe I wanted to return to being that a bit, and to a time when things were real or possible, because I think as you get older, you at least perceive things as being a lot less possible. In many cases, I think that's true. So I was like, well, that's about all that was about all I really wanted to do. So I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I scheduled it in, and it was even in my contract that I signed with Bohemia that I would have the time off to do it. And before they agreed with it, they had to get their insurers or whoever, their team, to say, hey, what would happen if he died? And I remember the Czechs are very like, I think it's a translation issue, but they're very stoic. They're very just matter of fact. So I think this wasn't meant with any malice, but they were like, yeah, no, we can allow this. Worst case scenario, if you died, it would probably actually increase the sales of the game. So they weren't saying it in a bad way, but it just that lost a lot in translation.
Yep.
I was like, cool, good. So that was in there, and I remember when we were looking at delays and that, I actually went back to Marek and I said, should I cancel this trip? And it was Marek who said to me, he's like, no, you should just do it. He's like, if you stop and don't do these things, then you will never do them. He's like, there will always be a reason for something else. He's a really fascinating person, actually, and I think very underrated in the video game industry. Him, his brother, and their business partners actually grew that whole company from like nothing, through a very, very difficult, challenging time in PC gaming. And so, and that had a really big impact on his life as well. So he definitely encouraged me to just take the time and commit to those plans. And I think he was absolutely correct, because the 2 years following, when I had climbed it, were absolute bloodbaths. One of the years was no one got to the top because of serious avalanches, and then there was a bunch of ice falls and earthquake. So if I hadn't have gone, it's quite possible either I would have died, or at the very least the trip would have been a total failure.
Well, actually, a really good segue. I'll go to a viewer submitted question here. And this one's from iRoadie. And I said to you, we had a question about Mount Everest, and you're probably aware that of late it's been quite bad on the mountain as well. And his question is about, as a mountaineer who climbed Mount Everest, what's your view on the mass tourism there with the latest tragedy of the poor Sherpa that died and the probably reckless behaviour of the mountaineers that led to that, which is a terrible story for those who don't know about it.
I think actually the people rallying against tourism actually end up causing some of that problem. So while I was at Everest, what I noticed is the big companies. So there was two main companies then. One's a New Zealand company called Adventure Consultants, which was originally founded by Rob Hall and Guy Cotter. It's now run by Rob Hall and Gary Ball, and Guy Cotter runs it now. Amazing New Zealand mountaineer as well, and they're a great company. So I went with them. And then there's Mountain Madness, I think, or an American company, guiding company. So they spend millions and millions of dollars. Everest is a problem of logistics. It's not really a mountaineering problem in the strict sense. It's a problem of logistics. So that means it needs a logistics solution. So while we were at base camp, our team had access to five weather satellites. Now, I mean, these are very sophisticated weather satellites with modeling and that. So they were plotting the position and the shape and the altitude of the jet stream while we're climbing it. So, you know, the jet stream goes like this, and in Everest, you can end up with only a few days really that are possible to climb it in the year. Based on the weather, because if you try and climb it while the jet stream is hitting the summit, you've got negative 60 degrees Celsius still temperatures with 300-kilometer-an-hour winds. I mean, you might not even even if you could physically hold on to the mountain at that point, you'd just be frozen to pieces, and that's actually happened to people on Everest before. So there's an enormous amount of logistics going in, and a lot of people, to not be bad, they say, I'm going to go there and I'm going to climb Everest myself, but that's just not possible. So then they end up hiring porters and stuff through usually third-party companies. So while I was there, our guiding company gave away oxygen bottles to people at altitude. They were heavily involved in the removal of rubbish and stuff like that. So I think while many people are well-meaning and saying, oh, we shouldn't have tourism on Everest and that, they tend to point the finger at the big companies, when in actual fact, I think it's people turning up and just sort of hiring a porter and stuff, not really understanding the problems involved and not being there for the long term, not being there to try and improve the tourism. I think there's a tendency as well to look at problems like that and say, right, we shouldn't be doing any tourism there. Even if that's true, what if you just leave? Now, what do the Sherpa have? Because in many cases, that's a really good job for them. That's why they work really hard, sometimes to the point of basically death, because they want to become a climbing Sherpa. So there's like a strata of promotions, because that is life-changing for them. That's enough money to send their kids to university, maybe even overseas. So as we remove some of these industries we don't like, we need to make sure that we're following that up with investment in those territories, because definitely for that region, tourism is their lifeblood.
It sounds like a very similar argument to the big game hunting in Africa, where I watched a very good video and I share it quite often when people talk about how terrible it is, people going and hunting. And it's like, yeah, it is. I like guns. I like going to the range and shooting a gun. I'm quite content to shoot at a paper target. Some people, though, don't. And when you come to things like these animals, there's a massive industry around the area selling the licenses to maybe shoot a problematic elephant or something like that. And the income generated from that far exceeds any income they're going to get from any other sources of business in that area, because there really is no other opportunity. So as much as it's a bit distasteful allowing, tourism on Mount Everest, it's kind of necessary for the people who live in that area. Otherwise, you've got to look at big alternatives. And who are we to tell people who live in that area what they can and can't do with their own resources of that area? It's terrible, but if it, it's a quandary.
It's funny, whenever I see a thread on Reddit or something or somewhere, there's a lot of people who don't know about stuff, and I guess most people are just familiar with what they see. So you tend to see images of long lines of people on the summit, and that there was only one day in the entire 2 months I was away that I saw a long line of people, and that was moving one of the times we moved from Camp 3 to Camp 4, and it was only for a relatively brief period of time. And again, that came down to logistics. So the main companies got together and worked together to make sure that there were no scheduling issues, so moving at different times and that. And it just so happened that one day that got screwed up, probably by a bunch of people who were just independents, who independently decided to move at a certain time. Whereas, all the other times, the big companies would come together to avoid having bottlenecks and having people just standing around, because if you're standing around, you're getting cold. It's a lot. I mean, again, I'm fascinated by survival. I'm similar to you. I love guns. I love engineering, stuff like that. But I'm also quite happy not not having it. I suppose I'm fascinated by survival in the same ways that I'm terrified of it, and
Yes.
and that makes it fascinating. It can be very difficult to explain that to people, but yeah, no, I think it's tourism and all that kind of stuff is a complex issue. Maybe that's why I like video games, because it's a way to explore a lot of these very interesting things and scenarios and emotions without having to endanger yourself and without having to endanger or exploit other people. That's why I, with DayZ, I was looking for an emotional reaction, and how could I make the player invested in something, and then how could I have them wager that investment to produce an emotional reaction.
It's actually a really good segue. I'm a bit of a shameless promoter of some people out there in the DayZ community who I think are massively underrated, and one of them is that friend of mine I mentioned before, Vigilante Gamer, and he's got a short video that is called the DayZ The Core Experience, and it's from 9 years ago, I think, Dean, and I share it with a lot of people, and I'll quickly show it to you now if you've never seen it, and I'll also let people who may not have seen this, but there was a bit of talk recently in the DayZ community about, the game and how PvP focused it's become, and I'm quite renowned for how terrible I am at PvP in the game, and I actually countered that to a lot of people by saying, I kind of don't want to get better, because one of the things I love about DayZ is the fear, the psychology of the game. And that's why I love this game so much. So I'll quickly pop up the video. There we go. Now, I'm not sure. Just to confirm, you can see this okay?
Yep, I can see it.
A bit of buffering.
I jumped into this game again for the first time in a while, moved into Zelenogorsk and decided to loot the military base at the southern end. I was just checking the game out, seeing if server issues had improved, if the frame rate was better, new items, things like that. This character's been alive for a while and I just wanted to keep it that way. I'm only playing on a third-person server because I couldn't find any populated first-person ones to play on. Anyway, I'm just in this ultra-cautious survival kind of mindset, and I noticed something. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, but I wanted to err on the side of caution, as sometimes those paranoid feelings turn out to be right. So let's rewind back and see if you notice what I did.
I can see this is resonating with you already, dude.
There was indeed another little chappie running around. I didn't go after him because, even though I wanted to run into some people, I wanted it to be on my terms, and if I'd just taken off after him, he might have seen me first. I didn't want that to be a possibility. I eventually moved up the top of the town and watched over it for a while and saw nothing.
I'll pause it there because I never really like showing the entire video of someone else's content, but Vig is a good friend of mine, and when you said about the goal of creating a game where you can explore psychology and things that IRL, to get the fear from a situation like that is very hard to generate. I don't know why, but very, very difficult. But in a game like DayZ, even just the chuckle that you had watching that video, and I can tell what's happened here, and he absolutely freaked out. And Vig is one of the most tactical people I know in the game, and I just loved that video, that in 2.5 minutes he was able to sum up one of the things that makes DayZ stand out compared to even most Battle Royale games. it's very hard to get a fear. Whereas in DayZ, because everything's on the line, you did create the ultimate psychological game that's not just about jump scares.
Well, I think part of it comes down to you have to make something. To make something matter, it has to have a degree of consequence. So it's usually around loss. And I usually do it with a pair of car keys or something. So I usually, get something flashy and say, or that Lego behind there, or a car key or something, and say, if I say this is your car for an hour or even a day, you're going to treat it very differently than if I say it's your car forever. And I think we have this implicit understanding of ownership. Another Carl Sagan quote where he was talking about fundamental understanding of the concept of one, of something, two of something, or many. Some cultures only have a word for many. They don't get into specific quantities when it gets to many. So I think that we have this understanding of owning something. And there's over time, so the most memorable stuff is always the really nice stuff that people sent you. And I remember getting an email from this guy, and I thought it was going to be a bit of a hate mail, because it started off with the story of the guy who was playing the game, and I think he had this character that had been alive for like 20 hours or something over a variety of different sessions. And they were playing by themselves, and they moved usually to an airport. It's usually in one of the military airports or something where people die. And he moved in there, and he did one thing silly, and he heard a brief crack, and then the screen went to black. And he was so mad at the game that he uninstalled it immediately. He was so mad that he uninstalled it, and he started writing me this email. And I was like, oh, here we go. And then he goes, and then as he was writing the email, it was such a rush that he immediately wanted to play again, and he then had to start downloading it on Steam, and so he was going to have to wait. I think because of his internet, he was going to have to wait another 6 hours to play, and so he had to write me the email to describe how immense amount of roller coaster emotions and how cool that was. I also had another really memorable email from this father and son, who was. And his father was talking about how it had been a really good way to connect with his son, and they were playing together. And it had all been fairly chill and just kind of fun and that. But they were, I think, investigating a house together, and it had gotten quite serious because I think they'd been alive for quite a while at that point, and they heard a buzzing noise, meaning there was a dead body nearby. So they went to loot it, and while they were there, they got ambushed by another player, and they managed to make it out. But then, as they were running away, he got shot and got a broken leg, and they were trying to keep him alive, keep the dad alive, and his dad was telling his son to just run, and it was this hugely emotional experience. And his son was committed to finding morphine, and so his son was running off into these different houses looking for morphine while his dad was hidden, and his dad was saying how traumatic it was for him to be worrying about his son running off by himself, because up until that point they'd just played together. But it was just very interesting. And then the dad was talking about how weird this was, because he could have just respawned, but it felt very real.
Yep.
And so achieving that suspension to disbelief. And I do feel like it's an art we've lost a bit with video games. And I suppose what I find very difficult is it's very hard to take risks, especially now, because the game community is so brutal around making little missteps. So we found this with Icarus. We tried to do what I thought the survival genre needed in terms of a mission focused gameplay, but we didn't really get it right. So then we backed off on it. But then you kind of get hate from people because you tried something and it didn't work, and then when you change it, then you get the people who wanted the original thing.
Yeah.
And I think that the same amount can be said for DayZ as well. There was a lot of things we tried that were my decision completely, and maybe even were resisted a bit by Bohemia, that I was just flat out wrong on. I think if we want games that really tug at these emotional heartstrings, then the gaming community needs to accept that we're not going to get it right. And sometimes that can even mean project failure, because it's really hard sometimes to make these changes in games. So
You mentioned the word failure there. I've actually just been listening / reading a book. I think it's called Black Box Critical Thinking, and it's about
oh dear, I think I lost you. This is what happens to people when
not sure what happened then, but we switched around.
you were role playing that dad getting shot. Because that's the thing in DayZ, when you got shot, it was just to black.
Yeah.
No sound, no nothing. It's just you are dead. I've always liked that in video games. Yeah.
Yes. But with the failure, it's a learning experience, and there's such a negative connotation around someone failed at something. Most people like to look and go, you suck, you failed. But it's no, I failed, and I'm going to learn from it. And next time I can go back with learning. And it's a great book. If I'll see if I can find it and put a link in the description for the video if anyone wants to see it. But critical thinking about black box theory and addressing how the airline industry looks at failure compared to most other people. But that's awesome that you've got that approach, and it sort of ties in to I watched the Big Fry interview with you, where you talk about people asking with Icarus in particular, why aren't there more aliens and stuff like that, and your answer made me wonder if that was something you learned from DayZ pre-alpha early access release. You basically said you would have liked to go down that line, but would rather the game do well what it has already, then we could add more later. And that answer really resonated with me, and what you just said before.
Yeah, so I often talk about it in New Zealand as I feel like we actually need to have a national conversation around failure. I think a lot of people, particularly now, and we see with a lot of new people coming through, really struggle with failing at their first commit or failing at their work in video games. I think the video game industry itself is really adverse to even talking about failure, because failure or not doing anything right is seen as this kind of how would I describe it? Like a kiss of death almost. So people look at your concurrence on Steam and they say dead game or whatever and stuff like that. And I think that game developers obsess about that. But I mean, DayZ was taking a lot of risks, and in Standalone, there were a lot of core decisions of mine that were just flat out wrong. And actually, I forgot to answer it, but earlier one of your questions was about why I left. For me, I think people forget I went from having effectively nothing to having millions of dollars in the space of a few weeks. I also went from, I'd worked in the video game industry before, and I'd been an officer in the military, so I wasn't an idiot, but I went from being a team member on a project in a brand new company to in a company that was unfamiliar with me, to leading a 50-person team in a country where I didn't speak the language, and didn't know the culture, and didn't even have a proper long-term visa at all. So it was extremely disorienting, and I think the fact that I came through that alive and without some kind of addiction or something wrong with me is pretty significant. I definitely saw it like the old me had actually died, because when you think about it, I went into that whole situation. I had a good job. I was on a leave of absence from the military. There was a whole life there. There was a whole life that just got obliterated in the space of a few weeks. And I mean, it just that kind of change just drives a total wreckage ball through your life.
Quickly, how old were you at that time?
I don't even remember. I would have been 32-ish, I guess.
Yep. So still relatively young in the scheme of things, and to go from you said that you weren't a rich family, and then to life-changing wealth, and a lot of pressure around this DayZ game must have been really daunting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just so busy I didn't have time to think about it. So I remember when I was going on the Everest trip, they warn you, because you have a team doctor that actually goes with you. They were just talking a lot about what they call the post-Everest depression. So a lot of people, when they go climb Everest, it's a massive thing, and they're training for it for a long period of time, and it's an event they're looking to for a long period of time as well. And then afterwards, there's nothing. like, or not nothing. You know, what comes after that? And they see the same thing with people with going to the Olympics, because going to the Olympics can be this huge commitment that can start when you're 13. A lot of the contestants are starting even younger. So it's this massive thing, and your whole life is leading up to it, and then you go do it, and then what's next? In my case, I summited Everest, I think it was at 4:26 a.m. on like the 28th of May or something like that, 27th maybe. And the next day, I was at base camp, and a few hours after that, I was on a helicopter to Kathmandu. Normally people walk out, but I needed to be in the Czech Republic so I could be in LA for E3 a few days later. So I was like on a plane. I was on a helicopter and on a plane, and I was in Prague less than 72 hours from when I was on the summit of Everest. I'm probably one of the few people ever to have done that. Because it's very difficult to even achieve that, to get the helicopter to come in and pick you up. But because I needed to do that. And what happened was, Matt might remember this actually, I arrived in Prague and I went for a run almost immediately. And it's the weirdest thing ever. I could not get puffed. My muscles got sore beforehand because I had been adapted to acclimatized to a ridiculous high altitude.
Yep.
And it was insane. So I'm probably I remember talking to a physiologist who'd been studying oxygen therapy, said that because of the risk to your body, they don't train with those altitudes. So he said that I'm probably one of the few people ever to have done that extreme transition, because I literally we summited, we went back, we were a few in my team, we were back at Camp 4 by lunchtime, and then I've always been really good at descending, like always been really good at it, and I basically just descended down to Camp 2, and then I was out of there.
You're a bit of a madman, aren't you? You like to push the boundaries with things like that. That's
I don't know whether I am, though. I actually think that I'm mostly really safe. I like to be, I believe the word is titillated, like I like to be a little bit scared, but that doesn't mean that I'm not scared, Maybe that's why I like games like DayZ and Foxhole and stuff like that.
Come on, Dean. How often do you push the envelope in your Lamborghinis?
Not really at all,
no?
To be honest. I think I also barely get the chance to ever drive anything. I'm always either making games or playing them, like always, or talking about them. It's one of those three things. But yeah, I didn't properly cover off on the why I left. So, it was like the way I've described it in the past is like cooking in someone else's kitchen. I think I was also really. I was driving a lot of change in the studio, and I think probably Marek was so amazing to work with, because he was totally fine with not doing what he thought if you provided a good argument, and then as long as you listened to him, he'd want to listen to it. He'd be like, well, I think maybe we should do this. And I'd be like, nope, we should do this. And even if I was wrong, he never beat me up over it. I think I remember there were a couple of times I'd go back and say, wow, you were really right. And he was like, that just happens, No one's like born as a CEO or whatever. You've got to learn how to do it. I think it would have been different if I had been able to speak the language. I just think that the language barrier and the culture barrier was really tough. Also, that was on the back of me having been in the army for a couple of years, and I had been constantly moving. I don't think I had a permanent place to live at that point for like 5 years. And honestly, I don't. By permanent place to live, I mean I didn't even have a lease. I was renting. So even after DayZ ended, this carried on almost to this day. Like I've really been in the same place long enough. When I was working out of London, I was living in a hotel because it was cheaper. Now, I know that sounds amazing, but it's really not. So, yeah, I think I was trying to break that cycle of just feeling like I was a tourist and I was going to say my own life, but at that stage, my old life had been annihilated, and and then you kind of go into this new hell, and I think this is where a lot of people who have successful games, you go into this new hell of what's next. You don't want to get defined by the thing that you did 10 years ago. and it comes up all the time. You know, if you want to go on a date, people have read about you. I remember reading a Reddit thread about the California wildfires, trying to find out information about it because I've got a lot of friends who live in California. And I'm halfway down and someone's like, wow, this looks like, you know, a DayZ hellscape. And then I see someone reply, oh, isn't that game that didn't get finished? And then someone goes on this big rant about Dean Hall, and they're talking about me, and I'm like, you don't even know who I am. Like, you've never met me, and these people are talking about me, like, and they're having a whole conversation about this guy. And I remember this happens even with people I know, very well.
It's almost like an out-of-body experience, isn't it? Like,
I remember being on a call, and the call lasted 30 or 40 minutes, and it was my Prague accountants, my Czech lawyers, my New Zealand lawyers, my US lawyers, and I realized that it was like an hour-long call, and my agents and that, and I realized it had been 20 minutes and I hadn't said a word, and these people were talking about me as a thing. So I think that's where the death is who you are. Doesn't exist. Then it becomes what everybody think you are. That's why I sometimes describe myself as the Nickelback of video gaming. You know, I feel like Nickelback get a hard.
Yeah, they do.
You know, I think they get mistreated a bit. Because it's not about them or their music and the decisions they make. It's about what people think of them. And sometimes I think people criticizing them have either never listened to a song or I don't know. So I think I wasn't good for the project. I wasn't nearly as productive as I should be, and I was running against the grain of how the company wanted to run, and that doesn't mean that I was wrong. But I think, being the military man I am, I think if you're just constantly fighting the group, then that's a problem in and of itself. And that's not a criticism of Bohemia. I think that's more, I knew I needed to go away and learn a bit as well, which is why with Icarus I didn't want to pick a PvP game, because I think that our whole industry is making PvP games and they're not dealing with the core issues with PvP, antisocial behavior, hacking, alts, stuff like that, which is all stuff I see in a game like Foxhole. So, I hope I figure some of those things out before I'm too old to make video games, but I think that someone has to, and I think a lot of projects get announced without people really making the commitment, and I think it is a lifelong commitment to try and figure out some of these problems. And so I think that's a criticism I'd have with our industry. In fact, I think we've taken steps back since 10 years ago. I think our engines are largely letting us down. We've got distracted with a lot of other things. So I think the video game industry has taken a lot of sideways steps in certainly the last 5 years. Rocketworks
has definitely been trying to do some different stuff. Like, I remember a couple of years back, there was an article getting around about some of the policies that you have within your organisation, and hearing you talk about your experience working in Prague with BI made me wonder if that was part of the reason why you did some rather forward-thinking policies like the unlimited leave, which I've worked in HR myself, and I totally understand the theory behind it. Yeah, there might be one or two bad eggs who will abuse it, but for the most part, most people won't. And I'll let you talk about that a bit. The theory behind that, but also you've obviously got quite a few multicultural people in your team. Those who follow Icarus. Brian came to the team for a while and helps you with the game, and you've probably got people from all around the world. Is that your experience at Prague helped you shape your own company's onboarding and looking after your employees?
I would say that in general, so every country I've visited and spent some real time in and actually worked in, I think has left an impression on me. I mean, I often describe myself as a flag-waving New Zealander, and I think that's definitely true. But my time in Singapore changed me and made me a lot less competitive and a lot more cooperative, which I wasn't before. The New Zealand military likes to talk about teamwork, but I remember we had an instructor, a visiting instructor from Sandhurst, the military academy in the UK, the training school for officers in the UK. And I remember that instructor saying our New Zealand course wasn't a training course for officers in the army, it was a selection course. I think out of the 60 people who would start, only 50% would graduate. And it's a year-long course, and it was hell. It was very difficult and very physically demanding. In New Zealand, for the army, all officers have to do essentially infantry training for a year. So you're digging holes for a year, suffering through a Waiouru winter. It's very tough, very, very, very physically demanding. Yeah, so that the Singaporean, so it was very competitive, and they definitely, the Singaporeans were a lot more cooperative. They were very about teamwork and that, which was really news to me. I remember my first peer review assessments were like, he's an excellent soldier, he's like, one of the best in our platoon, but he just writes people off. If someone was falling behind, I just wouldn't bother helping them, because it was New Zealand Army was a very competitive environment, very, very, very. I don't know whether necessarily cutthroat, just competitive. You don't have to. There's this insidious sort of competition that isn't about putting someone else down, but is very much about being the best, and that was what the New Zealand Army, for me, was about. It was, you wanted to be the best officer, and it wasn't that you were trying to put anyone down, but you were always trying to be better, and that your expectation is that everyone else was doing the same as well. So during our training, you'd be and just a week of hell, and I mean literally digging. We're digging trenches in alpine desert earth, which is hell as it is. And I mean, people might not be familiar, like literally digging categories of trenches, like World War II trenches, with entrenching tools.
Which is not a fun experience, people.
No,
it
and
is not a fun experience.
At least we didn't have to cut the wood, but then they give you the wood to actually go into your different categories of trenches, and you're putting roofs on them, and then sandbagging to cover it. And you're doing this for a week, and the winter and Waiouru, and it's just hell. So they'd walk around with these.
Frozen?
It was awful, and they'd walk around with laminated. They're called an MD717, which is the form number for leaving the military. And so they would walk around with laminated versions of these, would be waterproof, with like OHP markers. And they would, in the middle of the night, when you're doing a sentry duty, they'd be like, "Hey, look, you can just sign this. You can just leave right now." And go back to the command post, and like we're literally cooking food. You could smell it. They'd be like cooking barbecued food or something. So that, there was a lot of pressure to get you to leave, because they only wanted the people that were there. So that left a big impression on me, and I think Prague was the same way. I think I really liked how Marek operated and operates. I don't think he gets the credit that he should in the video game industry. I think part of that's because he's quite a private person. I think, I find that a bit of a shame that we don't celebrate some of that in the video game industry enough. But I think we do that to ourselves by, again, not talking about failure, not educating customers that, sure, one or two games make absolute bank, but most games don't make any money. And I mean don't make any money by a lot, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of game closures now. So people like Marek are taking these huge gambles, and for him it is about making a good game. They commit to their games regardless of how they do financially, and they stay the whole course. So that left a really big impression on me. But I would say it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. I think there were a couple of things that we tried in our studio with Rocketworks that just didn't work. We tried the no managers thing, and that was just a disaster. I think if everybody's responsible, no one is, and that made everybody get kind of mad at me, because they're like, "Well, you're in charge of the company," and I'm like, "Yeah, I just had money and I wanted to see cool games. Like, I didn't expect that you were going to have to get."
But
me
you
to make
tried something. That's to be applauded.
It is, but I think people, again, don't think about the personal cost with trying. Yeah. Actually, let's use DayZ as an example. You start out and you gather up a bit of gear, and your friends want to gear up, and maybe you want to get a helicopter and go around and do some cool stuff. You make a simple mistake, and boom, you lose everything. And I think we're not good at numbers as humans. We're not good at, we all. Nobody thinks they're going to get hit by lightning, but everybody thinks they're going to win lotto. And that just shows how bad we are with
Yeah.
probabilities and numbers and considering risks, which is, you brought up the airline industry, right? And
Mhm.
failure. So, I was originally in the Air Force, so like that their rules of aviation safety are written in blood. And that's, very, I think, apparent on people. So yeah, no, the Czech Republic definitely rubbed off on me. I think they've got a very cool independent game industry there. You've got Factorio, you've got Euro Truck Simulator, you've got Kingdom Come Deliverance, Armour, obviously DayZ. So it's a pretty cool part of the world, certainly in terms of video game development.
It's actually really good because you do like to talk. You're actually answering a lot of the questions, so I'm actually ruling some out that I've got lined up here.
Well, I will say at this point, it's like 10 years. It's pretty rare now that I get a question I haven't got before. I will say, so we'll see.
Ooh, okay. I want to know if this is one. Then I'm going to share a video with you, and I want to know your honest reaction to it. It's a video that is legendary for the old school DayZ fans, and I'm certain you've seen it, but I don't know whether you've ever said what your opinion on this video is. The special video that was done for the release of DayZ 2.
I think I have seen this one.
I'm very happy to announce my next game, DayZ 2. Keep in mind, this is still in beta. So
I'm not going to play any more of it then. You've seen it. What did you think of it? I took this as a great bit of parody comedy.
Oh yeah, it was great. I mean, I wish I was that big from the gym there. I mean, those were great. And actually, you talked about like moments that made you remember stuff. I remember with DayZ, the mod for me was probably some of the funnest game development time ever, because everything moved so fast and the community reacted so much. And I think it was when I first saw the memes really start, and the memes got popular. Like some of the memes around DayZ got to the top of Reddit like that. And I remember, I think I was making some changes to the DayZ mod, and someone made one of those Hitler parody videos, Downfall.
Yep.
So it was they're still up actually. There was some very funny ones where people were talking through the changes I was making. I think it was controversial changes, like when I removed pistols. So there was all these bugs, right? So I think the Downfall parody meme was like, I can't get into the server, and the Hitler's like, oh well, don't worry, I'll get a pistol or whatever anyway. And then it was like, someone's like, Steiner
has removed pistols from the game.
Update 7.12 has removed pistols. And it was very funny. I mean, it was pretty awesome. Then there were actually some really big creators making DayZ videos. There was the D-Day Hollywood guy, who made a bunch of in real life videos. It could be pretty surreal at times. Like, I remember I was walking around Prague or something, and I heard people talking about DayZ just randomly. I remember I was in Queenstown and I was driving a very nice car, and I parked in front of this very nice hotel, and I got out of it, and these kids yelled at me saying, "Aren't you the guy that could have made Fortnite?" Which I thought was funny, and also very not emasculating, but it was the perfect. It was only like 12 or 10. You know how like 12 or 10-year-olds can just be the most cutting.
Out of the mouths of babes. With things that only kids will say. They have no filter.
Everybody was already looking at me, and then it was that was very embarrassing, but it was very funny as well. So I think all the memes are very hilarious. There was a very funny one, and I've lost the GIF because I think it's gone down, and it was a hype train one, and it was a GIF with my face on a little train bouncing around, which was pretty funny.
If anyone knows where that is, because I'm literally stunned at some of the stuff that people have got saved away on their computers.
The only one that was disturbing was I did see one, I think it was made by a Russian community. And it wasn't meant in a bad way, but it was a staged, like, I'd been captured by insurgents in DayZ beheading video. So that was a little disturbing, because of course my character was, playable in DayZ. So that
Yes.
was probably the only one that was the only meme that was a bit.
Why did they take that out? Even the Dean Hall zombie. Is there a reason why?
My nose is too big. So I'd said just make the nose smaller. And but their artist, one of their character artists, is this crazy, like, 60-year-old, like, really talented artist, but who lives out in a house in the Wops or somewhere, and just does it for the art, and didn't want to, was provided with photogrammetry scans of me. So rather than make my nose smaller, because it was poking through the balaclava. Maybe I should have just got a nose job. That could have fixed it. I don't know.
You're a very self-deprecating person, Dean. I like that. That's awesome.
Well, I'm 42 now. That just comes with the territory.
You do not look 42, mate. That's why I was not quite sure what your age was.
I look a lot older than I did in the early video game, the early DayZ videos. I look like a child in some of them.
You do, actually. Even Matt Lightfoot. You look back.
Well, he was very young, but
yeah. Yep. Was it hard to let go of DayZ? Looking at it now, do you look back and think, "What if I'd stayed with the project?" Or you put that behind you?
No, definitely. I think that's normal and natural. Absolutely. But I think the reality is I wasn't doing the job justice. This is another weird thing. So you get, like, this online hate, right? And someone will say, like, you're terrible or whatever. And then in the same breath, they'll be like, I can't believe you left DayZ. And it's like, well, which of those is true? Because let's say that one of them is true. Let's say I am really bad. Isn't it a good thing that I left the project? Or, like, so how does that work? I don't know.
There's no logic in some people with their the way they try to rationalize an argument, and that applies to so many aspects of life, be it politics, religion, all the rest of that sort of stuff. And yeah, sadly. Yeah.
I also think I really want to solve the challenges. I'm fascinated with multiplayer gaming, but I think we have I remember seeing this talk I think it was at the EVE Online do this convention in Iceland. It's really cool, actually. I presume they still do it. I don't know. Anyway, they had this speaker there who was a scientist studying space elevators. You know what a space elevator is?
No.
So they you put a satellite in orbit and you drop a line very long way all the way to Earth.
Yep, okay.
And you use that as a launch mechanism, and there's a lot of problems with that and dangers with it as well. So he devoted his life to studying that, like literally and he doesn't know whether it'll ever happen ever, but that's what it requires people to. And what he said that he found was that he spends a lot less time studying tensile strengths and stuff like that, and a lot more time studying people. Because what he's found is that people tend to overestimate what can be done in 5 years, but underestimate what can be done in 10. And I think that applies to video game development as well. If we want to make these games that have all these promises of playing together and PvP particularly requires things that we have not done in video games yet. Every single company out there that is doing PvP is hiding the issues to do with toxicity and antisocial behavior. And that's not helping us. And everything is just band-aids on the top of it. If you take the controversies around VAC bans and CS2 and AMD at the moment, it's a great example of it. Now I obsessed over this with DayZ Standalone, which was actually a mistake. In hindsight, I think instead of trying to deal with the hacking, which ended up removing some of the very cool code that allowed us to have lots of zombies in the mod, we should have just built in more tools for the community to be able to manage it. I kind of didn't really appreciate how organized the community can get, and I think if you look at the Minecraft community, which has just no protections for hacking and stuff like that, but the community can fill the gap on that, at least for now.
It's interesting what you said there about the toxicity and so on, because like PUBG, when it first released, one of the greatest things for me with PUBG was the lobby before a match started. And there were some edgelords in there who were saying some, crazy stuff. But they couldn't work out a way to deal with it, so they just canned it. And to me, it kind of killed the vibe of the game. It went from being a game where you knew that there was a bit of trash talk, and some trash talk is fun, some trash talk is good, some goes too far. But there was no way to report the people who went too far, so they just banned the whole lot of it. And to me personally, that was one of the big things that killed it a bit, because it just felt like you were just playing against other bots now. There was no human element to the game. It almost disappeared to me.
Yeah, so I see that as my space elevator. It's a problem that I have devoted my career to look at, but I think it's quite possible I might spend my whole life trying to find the solution to it and not. But I think that if you want to do the job, then you have to do it properly. So yeah, probably the biggest challenge is, I think, it's very hard to take risks at the moment in the video game industry. I think gamers, quite rightly, maybe they got disenfranchised with the process because they got, screwed around by big companies and then, early access and stuff like that. But I think the reality is it's very difficult to take risks now. So, yeah, we've kind of stalled as an industry.
There is a lot of problems. I kind of fall into the camp of no pre-orders, boys. On the podcast, I've talked many a time about how jaded I was with the release of Fallout 76, and just how much of a nightmare that was. And then we've got the big one at the moment, which is a game relevant to this industry, the day before, and everyone's just scratching their heads, going, "What's happening?" Dead matter. What's happening in this genre with some of these smaller companies that. Fantastic.
I think
we heard of it. It's bizarre.
I think it's because, and I bring this up all the time. If anyone in the video game industry or a gamer or whatever thinks that a problem is a failure of imagination on the team's part, it is not. I have almost never encountered a problem in video games that's a lack of imagination or a failure to imagine something. So the hard part of making a survival game is not committing to making a survival game or designing the right mechanics or writing a GDD. That's literally the easy part. It's delivering and putting it all together. And I think
what's the GDP for those who don't know?
GDD, game design document.
Yep.
And I think actually the engines that we have, like Unreal and Unity, they make it easy for you to get first steps, but neither of them scale without you writing that scale yourself, which is very, very challenging to do. And the way I think the biggest lesson I have about being a CEO is you have to make a million little decisions. None of those decisions are consequential in your success, but literally any one of those decisions could be consequential for your failure. So all of these little decisions you're making are not contributing to success, but are possibly going to sink you. So yeah, it's very challenging. And I think definitely the video game market at the moment, I woke up this morning and I was thinking, how would I describe it? And I would say it's a massacre. It's an absolute massacre at the moment. And I think we will continue to see just scores and scores of studios just go under in the next year. So unfortunately, I think the net result for survival games, I think, will be just a massacre of studios that are making survival games.
Are you getting good support from the New Zealand government now? I know you've been quite vocal on that. They're big on the movie industry over there. Everyone who didn't know that New Zealand was its own country, you're probably in that sort of category of most people meet you and think you're an Australian, and it's a bit like being Canadian and called American. And now, because of Lord of the Rings, nearly everyone knows about New Zealand, but they're not really doing much with the gaming industry from what I've seen, from what you said in the past.
The Australian government announced a pretty huge rebate. And New Zealand certainly couldn't really afford to meet that, but they've made some commitments. We'll see. Ultimately, long term, I'm not sure. we necessarily want to base ourselves on the film industry? Do we want to make an industry that has to be subsidized forever? I don't know. I'm not a politician, and I don't have the temperament for it, so I don't. Luckily, we have a COO who's very good at that stuff. I'm the kind of person who would be very blunt, so I tend to get wheeled out occasionally to talk to politicians, but usually when they're fairly well prepared.
They basically keep you in a cupboard, break glass in case of emergency.
Yeah,
when we
probably.
hammer the point home.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think a politician is how was it described as someone who will make the decision for you to go fight for their country, not go fight for it.
Which we're seeing a lot of late. But it's kind of sad. But I did have one question going back to the survival course. It was an anecdote I heard you mention about how there was a biscuit you were given in the truck after the course. What type of biscuit was it?
Oh, I can't even remember. Yeah, I can't remember. Probably would have been one of those little, I don't even know, generic army biscuits usually.
Yeah.
Nearly everything is.
The only reason I asked was I was curious as to whether that biscuit you've ever sorted out and it's something that you're extremely passionate about now or something you can't stand the taste of. For me, it was kangaroo from my survival course. I ate kangaroo for 7 days straight. I can't eat this shit again. I cannot stand the taste of it. I know it's a good meat, very healthy meat, but because that's something I associate with quite a full-on course to do, I just can't stand the taste of it, even when it's being cooked by chefs in restaurants.
I think the only thing that's really the scariest thing about survival is knowing that you have a point when you lose the fight, or that you're prepared to lose the fight. Because I remember because the phases of it was the first phase was like the Amazing Race. You're moving from point to point in your squads. And then you've got to get enough points over the whole month-long thing to qualify to get the badge, and so you have to get so many points as an individual and some of it as a group. So you do that phase first, and you're moving a lot and you're carrying a lot of stuff, and that's really tough. And then the second phase of it was so that's the second phase. The third phase of it was that you had to construct, basically survive in one spot. I think it was for like 7 days or something like that. And you got points for building a structure, finding food you could eat and stuff like that. Yep. And I remember and the very first phase of it all was doing platoon attacks. But it was the second and third phase when you had restricted food. They gave you basically 48 hours food and you had to make it last the whole time. And during the pre-training, I had always found it easy to find other food, and I had made the food last, so I decided to spend that whole 48 hours during the second phase, so the moving around phase, so that I had enough food. So that meant for the whole second phase I had no food at all. Well, I couldn't catch anything. I think I caught one tiny little fish that was like that big, and at the time I didn't eat it because I wasn't that hungry, and so I sort of left it. Because it was a big commitment to make fire, so I decided not to bother cooking it, and I didn't want to eat it raw. I later on got so hungry I tried to eat it even though it had started rotting, because like a few days in the jungle everything rots. I think by the end of the week 4 my parts of my pants were rotting because they'd just been wet so much. I didn't really worry about my pants, but I kept real careful control of my underwear and my socks. I think I finished the 3 weeks with a dry pair of socks. Basically, at the end of the day, I would swap into, and I would keep my feet dry, and then I had this one pair of dry socks that I would keep in a plastic bag, and I would only use at night, and just religiously keep dry. So it was the feeling of. I remember there was one point I got so hungry, I was like, I'm gonna steal some food from my buddy who's over. And it was I was debating it. I wish I could say that I was like, I would never do that. I was totally debating. It was something I was very seriously considering. And I opted not to, but it was a narrow margin not to do it. and then I sort of definitely reached a point where I just was there. Well, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to lie on my bunk. And if that wasn't on the bed that I'd made, and if it wasn't a survival exercise, that would have been it. Like, I definitely know that at that point I had lost the fight at that point, and side. And so I think that's what I mean. It's very fun to explore these things in video games.
Yeah.
And I think it is. It's genuinely, these are interesting subjects, and I think that's why we're drawn to zombie games or zombie media. This is a fascinating thing to explore, and that's why when people scratch their head, they're like, "Oh, you like to climb mountains, you like to play video games. How do those relate?" And I'm like, they 100% relate. Like they're the same. They're the same kind of experiences. You're just you're able to do more efficiently in video games.
Now, I want to do a few questions about some of the law, not so much the law, but the canon about DayZ, the creation of the game, and so on. And the first one is what happened with these?
Got it. So, where did they go?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I've forgotten his name now.
For those who are listening, I just showed a Payday mask, the Dallas mask.
So, we were really good friends with the original Payday team, and they were big fans of DayZ, and I met them at a convention, and I was like, dude, I'd love to put your stuff in the game. And they're like, we'd love to put some of the stuff in the game. So we just did it. But unfortunately, when I left, there was a handover process, and of course, I didn't have any documentations of that other than emails.
Yep.
And so I believe after I left, the lawyers were like, oh, this is a legal risk, so they removed them, which is really sad.
Very, very sad. It's like I'm pretty sure there is a lawyers. Please don't stop listening now if you are. But I'm pretty sure there is a mod that has them back in there. But they were such a synonymous thing, even if they weren't quite, Eastern European, Soviet sort of era stuff. But they were just an iconic thing from the very early.
Well, I mean, we had confirmed email discussions with the senior. I think it was just one of those overly cautious things. Sadly.
Yeah, such as the renaming of all the weapons at the moment. I know they've got issues with the EU. What is it? Something 11 or 13? One of the copyright laws, and they're erring on the side of caution, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, I think it's long been a problem. You have some games like Euro Truck Simulator where they've actually gone out to the truck manufacturers and managed to get their agreements, which is great. But often those can come with big stipulations. I know from the Forza series, I think it was I know a few people who worked on that. One of the big problems with getting manufacturers to agree to put your stuff in game is not necessarily money or anything like that. It's how their control and use of their brand. So with car manufacturers, a lot of it comes down to how the car looks in an accident. Yep. That's a huge part of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Actually, when the DayZ mod was becoming the standalone, I ended up talking with people at Coca-Cola because I thought one of your first questions, the usual questions I'd get, was around Mountain Dew. Everybody wanted to know whether Mountain Dew provided you some benefit in the game. And in fact, I think it was a journalist for Wired was asking me. The previous interview they'd done was with Obama, and then they were interviewing me. And I remember him saying that I was harder to get a hold of than Obama. He'd had harder time scheduling an interview with me than Obama, and he took me to because I met up with him in LA. There was a time when I was going to be on the cover of Wired. They were talking about it I think something else happened at the time. It was Theranos or something. I don't know. But so yeah, I met this journalist at this Chinese place in LA. He took me to this great Chinese place. But he was asking me. He was like, so tell me. So he's like, it can be off the record, but he's like, there's a like secret penalty or a secret brief benefit to finding a can of Mountain Dew in the game, right? And I was like, no, I just made it the smallest spawn rate for like the lols, because I think during development of the game I'd been drinking a lot of Mountain Dew, and I just thought that was funny. And he wouldn't believe me. He flat out wouldn't believe me. Even though I was like, no, there's no like thing behind it, because he was providing me all this player testimony of people who'd found a Mountain Dew and kept it, and then had something terrible happen to them. And I don't know if it's still the case, but for a while there was this theory that basically finding a Mountain Dew was extremely rare, and it was very lucky if you drank it on the spot, but very unlucky if you carried it with you.
I think that's one of those psychological theories where if you believe something, then it'll start to happen.
You notice it, yeah.
But it's not actually. It's just you're noticing it more. Yeah, you've heard that before. When I interviewed Brian a few years back, he mentioned that there was some recording of you going through the process of bodily functions when you were considering that.
Yeah.
Yep. And he, one, do you still have that? Because I would love to see it. I love watching the footage of you when you had your actor and then you stepped in to show him what you were really meaning by the way you wanted infected to walk. But two, why did you move away from bodily functions in the game?
So it was mocap. They did motion capture for animation stuff. I'm again kind of like the whole timing thing. I don't really keep a lot of stuff at all. I try and approach everything, so I don't have any footage of anything really. We wanted to do a bunch of stuff, but you've got to get, if you just pile a bunch of stuff into the game, it doesn't kind of work. I think it's something we've wanted to look at for stationeers in terms of hygiene. I think hygiene can be a really interesting mechanic. It was something we talked about with Icarus. But yeah, I think it can definitely work in a game. It can be an interesting mechanic.
There is a mod for it in DayZ at the moment.
It kind of works in Ark. It's always kind of hilarious when your character just walks along and just poops, though. But yeah, I mean, it's a mechanic we laugh about sometimes. Actually, RimWorld, there's a really great hygiene mod. It's an essential mod to have for me personally to play it, because again, it's not just about the pooing; it's about water, and that's like a key survival requirement. Not just potable drinking water, but actually keeping yourself clean and reducing infection and keeping yourself warm and stuff like that. So 100% recommend that. I think it's called Dub's Bad Hygiene. Look at that. I even remembered off the top of my head. That's how much I like it for RimWorld. So I'm down for it. But yeah, like I say, with survival, I really think there's some generational shifts that need to happen. And I wish the game development environment was a little bit more associated with that. So, we tried hard to find a publisher to back Icarus, and we couldn't really find one. And so I don't know how game companies, including our own, are going to get enough money to take risks at the same time as, produce results. It's very difficult.
Yep. No, but there's an interesting mod for DayZ which has that as well, where you have to wash and you have like a hygiene meter, and the longer you leave it, the more likely you are to get an infection. And I think you get a fly noise. Whereas when you wash yourself, if you wash yourself long enough, you actually get a boost to your immunity, which is, I thought it was quite a novel, but again, it's heading towards the more hardcore style of DayZ that not everyone is interested in. They just want to be able to get in and run around and shoot. But yeah, I think it's great that there's, that the game allows for those sorts of mods to be added to it.
If I was making DayZ 2, there'd be two difficulties. The first difficulty would be hardcore, and the second difficulty would be exit game. So there you go.
Love it.
I'm not joking either. None of this.
No, you would have a lot of people.
I need to.
There we go.
Sorry about that. I had to change my battery. We've talked so much, I've run the battery flat.
Now, there was a video that you released a while back, and I absolutely loved the warning for it. that you put at the beginning of it, and it basically reads like this. So I'm curious if you remember it. Warning: the video you are about to watch contains raw, unedited footage of a video game in pre-alpha and may deeply trouble experts who post YouTube comments. It has not been approved by marketing and contains disturbing scenes such as poor FPS, floating loot, bad lighting, placeholder sounds, and many more bugs that obviously never occur in game development, and therefore the project is completely doomed. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I definitely remember that. I wish we'd had time to do more of those videos.
I loved it. I love that sort of I think they call it these days clap back at the YouTube, the experts who post YouTube comments. The sort of the segue for that is when I saw you'd done an interview with Big Fry, I was like, respect, because he's one of the harshest critics of a lot of games out there, and he generally doesn't pull punches. And it must have been I don't know whether it was daunting, but it was good to see you confront someone who a lot of people they don't like his approach to reviewing games.
Yeah, I mean, some of the, I think I said this to him, some of the worst, some of the things you most react to is because there can be an element of truth to them.
Yep.
I think
you did say that.
I think the other thing to remember is that think of a subject that you know really well, like that you're an expert in, and then think about whenever you see someone talking about that subject online or a news article that's written about it. In my case, I don't know if this is your experience or anyone watching, I almost never find that subject is correctly or properly talked about. So I think the reality is that that people don't understand the video game industry. There's a lot of lack of understanding, and I hope Big Fry doesn't mind me referencing him as a bit of a shock jock, shock jockey. Yep. Like, you get your DJs, I don't know if that's a culturally normal thing to call them. You sometimes get radio hosts who, they play things up a bit. And I watch Big Fry's videos, and I watch for that. It's one of the reasons I watch them. You want to see their entertaining reaction. And
Angry Joe is another one.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I think Big Fry, so many of his videos are we need to talk about. They wouldn't be phrased that way if there wasn't him being all sort of over top of it a bit. But I think that part of the video game industry's problems is because we're very insular in terms of a lot of the problems that we face as developers, because we're terrified of players of describing our game anything other than over resulting success. And that's where I think the Steam review system is completely broken. There was a game, and gosh, I've forgotten the name of it. The team posted a post saying they posted their actual sales figures, as well as how much they'd spent making the game, and they couldn't finish the game because of it. I think they'd made like $70,000 in revenue, and they'd probably spent like $2 million making it.
Yep.
And then the game's reviews just tanked even from there, and there was lots of people posting hate. And I remember just being very disheartened because that's unfortunately the reason why game developers aren't sharing a lot of information and don't want to tell game players the real reality of the situation. But I think the reality is that if we don't talk about these things, then we won't solve them. Game developers don't have all the answers. That's why I like community-driven development. That's why I like having a debate about something on our Discord. Or on Reddit or something, because we don't have all the answers. We have to figure things out. And I think Foxhole's a good example of that. You see people saying the game developers need to listen to the community. Well, they do, but also they've got to be the adults in the room. They know the code, they know what's possible and that. So it's a mixture between the two. It's a mixture of listening to the community, but then being the adult in the room.
One question, and is basically asking you to potentially guess the reasoning why, but something we've talked about a lot on the DayZ podcast, and it comes back to you talk about your experience dealing with Marek and BI and all the rest of it, is a popular consensus, and I've even been one of the people who said this as well, is that BI don't love DayZ. And part of the argument is you've obviously heard that yourself. You had a little chuckle there, but part of the reasoning for that is the main reason is we haven't seen a single community DLC. We've had one DLC released for the game, which is Livonia, which was pretty much a repackaged armor map, and we've got so many amazing modders out there doing some, we've got the Bitterroot map. I don't know whether you've seen anything about that of late. We've got Sumrax Demolsk, and that was one we were all certain was going to come out as an official DLC, but Sumrax didn't want to, and that's Sumrax, right, being the IP owner. But it's been so confusing to so many of us why they haven't released any for more DLCs for DayZ. The game's been in full release now for quite some time, and it leaves us scratching our head. It'd be instant cash money almost. It's still got an amazing player base. It still ranks in the top 50 games on Steam regularly. We don't know why they haven't.
I think DLC is an extremely challenging environment. So after we released Icarus, we recognized that if we wanted to survive, like I don't mean if we wanted to make money, the studio hasn't made a profit. And most video games, I'd say very few video game studios are making or even wanting to, their goal at the moment will be to survive the period that we're in now. So we identified that we really needed to rethink how the game was going to be funded. So we removed our back end completely to make it not a game as a service. We got a lot of flack for that, which I find hilarious because it's like, if we didn't do that, the studio would run out of money and you'd never be able to play the game. So, we spent quite a lot of money to remove and make sure that the game had life. So even now, if the studio goes under, the game will survive. And that was something we did deliberately, but we got a lot of pushback. We got a lot of negative reviews from it. We still get negative reviews around it. But I still stand by, again, it was the important thing to do to make sure the game could live on. So I think understanding, though, how to approach DLC is really difficult. And I think that a lot of studios are going to go through a lot of trouble because that's changed over the last even 5 years. We were just talking about it before our analysis post doing our New Frontiers launch. 92% of Icarus customers now buy one of our DLCs. 92% of people who buy Icarus today buy one of our DLCs. And that took a lot of discussion with the community, not just doing what they ask for. Either a lot of discussion. We're very lucky we've got like a veteran prospectors channel. I don't know whether the DayZ crew have that. You need this little group of people who you trust, who you can have a real no limits discussion privately where everybody knows it's not going to get released. So there's a few content creators in there, there's developers in there, there's a few senior community people in there. Everybody needs that space where they can be open and honest about their frustrations, where everybody trusts each other, and so we can try out ideas that maybe we aren't sure of and that kind of stuff. So you really need that environment. They could go in and say, okay, your pricing that you're proposing is terrible, it's not going to work. We can turn around and say, well, we're not going to be able to operate if we don't price it in this way. So that I think it's a really difficult thing to get right, and I suspect, and again I'm totally imagining because I haven't really talked about with them in ages, it's a very difficult thing to get right. Also, when people say that Bohemia doesn't like DayZ, I think it's more, if you look at an organization as what it eats, right? It's what it makes. That organization made armor. And so when I say I was a cooking in someone else's kitchen, it was a bit like that as well. Like the organization has to move in a direction. And even if Marek wants it to move there, it's like trying to move a cruise ship, right? Like the whole thing has to slowly move around. And it's the same with RocketWorks. We identified the changes we want to make, and it was very for us just difficult 2 years of touch and go.
Focus a while back.
Say again?
You had the VR focus a while back, which you moved away from, and
well, it wasn't a focus. It was I pooped on VR as an industry for a while, and then I was like, if I'm going to criticize it, I should at least try it out. So, so we did, yeah.
Yep. See, but a lot of people will counter that with they're still doing it for Arma 3, and it's But I know this is spitballing because you're not part of the project anymore. But that's just been a common belief by a lot of people in the community. It's like, if they're doing it for armor, why aren't they? And it just seems so illogical to us that they wouldn't do it for DayZ, because DayZ's player numbers right now are so much above even armor in Forger at the moment. It's
Yeah, I think I think I'm proud. I think our studio's unlocked a really good success for it. I think for the survival, to avoid this massacre that's going on right now, and that massacre is going to continue for the next 3 years, maybe 4. And what studios survive might just get bought up by Sony, Microsoft to survive the subscription apocalypse that's coming as well. So I think that's the challenge: is how do you have to understand a product very well to be able to produce DLC, and that's the challenge that they're going to have to unlock it. Yeah, I know what I'd do for DayZ DLC, but it's not free. If they want that, they can buy it off me. Yeah. Maybe I should make a mod. I don't know.
Oh, I'd love you to. I think a lot of people would, but because monetization for video games, it is an interesting thing. PUBG is a game quite close to my heart as well. I didn't mind their model, monetizing skins. If people want them, they can get them. They don't have any impact on the game. Whereas you see a lot of games, the pay-to-win models, which kind of ruin it. But there's one game that I'm sadly kind of addicted to, World of Warships. I absolutely love the game.
Same. I haven't played it in ages. Should I get back into it? I've heard varying things about it. I'm trying to see if I still have the icon on my desktop. No,
Dean, it's the best. It's the best naval battle game out there. But
so I'm surprised you haven't played Foxhole. In the 26th, they're bringing naval combat to Foxhole.
I will check this game out. I definitely will, because
I met the Foxhole team, actually. They're big DayZ fans. Actually, I think they just followed me back on Twitter as well. I sent them a message saying I'd been addicted to Foxhole again for the last week or so.
Yep. No, World of Warships is just doing some, I don't know, maybe they're just doing a massive money grab at the moment because player numbers are dying a bit, but they're introducing these submarines and these CVs that can one-shot you, and it's quite frustrating because a lot of them are behind paywalls. You've got to pay real money, not quite Star Citizen levels of money for a ship, but $100-$200 to get these ships, and it's like, I'm not paying that. I'll just grind my way through the tech tree. But again, it's quite a predatory model based on almost pokie machine style graphics and psychology to get people to, if you buy this next level, you'll get another chance and another chance. And I don't like that, but I understand the need. It's a game development company. They've got to have money coming in to keep the servers up, to keep the game going, to re-releasing new stuff. It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Where do you find that ethical middle ground?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it depends on the different games and stuff like that. I think that I know that World of Warships probably doesn't make money a lot of the time. They at least used to develop some of it out of Australia, and a couple of ex-colleagues of mine work for whatever World of Warships developer. I can't remember the name of the studio. It's called in Australia, so I presume it's still the same case. So, they're probably lucky in a bit that we don't see numbers on Steam. So again, players are very quick to flock there and be like, dead game. So when you're off Steam, there's definitely an advantage to that. And I actually think that's probably a bit of a secret to Tarkov's success, actually.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Staying off of Steam, so there's no review bomb of the. Actually, speaking of review bombing, did you take a personal bit of pride when DayZ finally moved from up to mostly positive in the reviews?
Well, if I did, I shouldn't, because I hadn't been involved with it. So,
it's still your vision, though. And yes, you said earlier on how many people have been involved in the soup that is the journey that DayZ's been on. So many cooks have had their hand in there, but it still must have been a slight bit of pride that it might not be exactly what you envisaged, but people are coming around to it.
I certainly think it deserves the relatively good reception that it's got, for sure. I'd agree with that.
Yep.
I think sometimes people, both in a good and bad way, massively oversubscribe my involvement.
In what way do you see that?
Both that, in terms of the massive, I don't know, like the people working on something at the time are the ones facing the cold faces of stuff. Again, it's kind of like there's no, failure of imagination problems. It's the same thing applies to good stuff as well. It's the boring, good old fashioned pulling together a good concept that really makes it work.
There you go. Recent reviews, very positive. All reviews, mostly positive. So, it's a testament to BI that they've stuck with it for so long, like you said earlier. And when I said before about how we wonder if they hate the game, well, I temper that with knowing that they've still stuck with the game. They're still supporting. They're still recruiting staff. They've one of the things that I love the most, Dean, is that there's actually members of the modding community that are now full-time employees over there. Dancer Jesus, who's the environment designer. Jacob Mango, who's one of the I'm not quite sure what Jacob's title is, but he's an Australian lad who's now over there. Mario from Mexico, who he's not on the DayZ team, but he's over there on the Armour team. It's great seeing them employ people from the modding community around this game that and the modders are so essential to DayZ's success.
Yeah, no, again, I think it is a complex product, and which means then you have to have people able to make mods for it, and then you have to market the mods and that. And yeah, I mean, I probably devoted my life to understanding survival games. And again, if I'm not playing games, I'm making them. And I don't think everybody quite has that obsession, maybe that I do.
Are there any games out there in the survival MMO style that are impressing you at the moment?
A lot. I think Tarkov, I don't think the industry has looked properly at Tarkov and what it can deliver. I did try out the Enshrouded demo. That was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. But I think probably the most fundamental game to me in the last while was Valheim.
Yep.
And I think Valheim really launched straight towards delivering an experience that made it feel like you were living in something, but trying to take that concept and elevate it to a PvP one. I think the industry has we don't have a games industry that will take those risks. It can't take those risks, and it's getting worse, as the only people who are going to be able to afford to make games is going to be the likes of Microsoft and that. So they're going to continue to have to buy studios, like, say, buying a studio like Rocketworks, because we won't be able to afford to take the risks to try and solve those PvP problems.
Well, we just saw BI selling a stake to Tencent, which a lot of people are like, oh, okay, that didn't see that coming, but.
Yeah, so I think that's the future we're looking towards, is that as gamers are so price sensitive, you can only sell your game on sale and you don't make enough money, so you sell your studio to Microsoft, who sells a subscription. And I think as an industry, we're kind of sleepwalking into that one. So how do we take the lessons from games like Valheim and Tarkov and deliver PvP experiences that scale? And I just don't think we're sleepwalking into that one, or sidestepping it even.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to go into some of the more of the viewer questions now. A quick one from iRody. What's the story behind the nickname Rocket?
Easy one to answer, kind of boring though. So I started work at a company called She Interactive, SIDHE in Wellington. It was my first real video game job, and it was in Wellington. I was working on a PS2 game. Actually a Wii game that then became a PS2 port as a baby producer, an associate producer. And when I see how you tend to get hazed when you start working at a place, so people were just calling me Glenn for just fun. But there was actually a real person called Glenn who came back to work and was like, why is everyone calling him Glenn? So then they called me Rocket Glenn, I think just because I was into space and rockets and stuff.
Yep.
And then that became Rocket Two Guns, just as a joke, and that just stuck, as these nicknames tend to do.
Yep.
And also, the reason I ended up going by rocket a lot was I was spending a lot of time in the US, and my New Zealand accent was very difficult for the Americans and remains so. And so whenever I'd order a coffee as Dean, it would come out as Dane or Dan or something, which is very confusing. Whereas rocket is just enunciated in a way that's very easy. So that was that just became how it was.
One of my mates, Prestige plays. How do you feel about the direction DayZ went in comparison to your original vision?
I mean, it's definitely not what I would do. But then it might be that the kind of video games that I make are too hardcore for most people. Like I say, but I also think to do what I want to do, we have to be able to scale things a lot more. So that's why people keep asking me, why didn't you put PvP in Icarus? I don't want to half do stuff. So I think that I don't think our industry should be making PvP games until we've solved some of these issues. And it seems like we're wasting time as an industry. And I'm not talking about just small games. I'm talking about big games like Call of Duty and that. They're just not dealing with the problems that we have. Counter-Strike, same deal. Counter-Strike 2. They are not solving the big issues, which is super disappointing because they have the money and they can take the risks, and they're not taking the risks. So if I was doing DayZ, and I'd love to look at that concept again, but I only want to do it until I have an answer for those issues. And I'm not sure that I will ever get the chance, because I would require a lot of Phil Spencer. If you're watching this, come and fund something actually ambitious. I've met him before, and actually they said that they'd really, and then they choked on Icarus, and I was very bitter about it.
Have you ever heard of a server, DayZ Down Under? It was a community server.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was run by a mate of mine, Spud, and he's actually handed it over to another team now, but he still loves it. And he actually had a question for you that sort of ties in with what you just said. Are you tempted to do a modern era survival game, not necessarily zombie, but maybe virus-related, Mad Max-esque per se? That goes to that hardcore extreme, because like I had my own server and I called it Dean's Beans, because I remember that quote you made about, finding a can of beans and you'd be so excited, and that always stuck with me in my head. And most servers don't do that. Food's easy to find, and there is a penchant for a truly hardcore. The joke in the DayZ podcast community is, I talk about it being cock and ball torture DayZ, where you are suffering constantly. But I love that. I love that experience of never knowing where my next meal is going to come from, and losing it all, which DayZ still kind of got, but it has moved away from what
I mean, I say, there's no failure of imagination in terms of video game problems, and I obviously think that's true, but I do think there's a failure of understanding, and I think that that we tend to get, as an industry, we've tended to get obsessed with a shiny of survival without, again, trying to push it forward by looking at the real issues around scale and balance, which is very difficult to do, and the idea that losing is fun, and how to pull that into the concept, and that if you just do what the community asks for, you actually end up delivering a bad game. And it's all about approaching survival as an onion and sort of peeling off those different layers of psychological pressures that show in. And in many cases, the game doesn't make any sense when you look at it on paper. It only all sort of comes together. So yeah, I think it comes back to that. I worry about, I think we're going into a pretty horrific time for video game studios, which is why so many are going out of business. I think companies like Valve and Epic are part of the problem, and I don't see that getting any better. So I definitely love to look at that kind of concept, but I don't want to look at it until I can solve the problems.
And to do something like that would be quite a complicated endeavor as well. So I'm guessing it's not going to be a cheap concept to come up with an effective and marketable, because one of the issues that we've talked about quite a bit on the podcast is DayZ being its own worst enemy, in that unless you have become aware of the game and you maybe watch videos, but for someone, say, sitting on their Xbox at home when they've got Game Pass and they've never heard of DayZ and they see this game called DayZ and they go, oh, sounds a bit like The Walking Dead. I'll download that, and then they spawn in, and it's a little bit better on Xbox or on console because they do have a brief survivor message that plays up. But for a PC player, you literally install the game and press play, and it doesn't tell you a single thing. You've got to work it all out, or there's not even a book you find in the game that explains crafting, that explains how to, create a fire drill or something like that. It's all got to be either guessed, and you need to have a fundamental understanding of the basic mechanics of a game. Combine this with that, or you've got to know where to look online to find it.
So my runner
for yourself.
My runner up for great survival game would be Frostpunk. Have you played Frostpunk?
No, I haven't played that one.
So it seems like a bizarre choice because it's not a first-person like survival-y game, but it's great, and that does a really good job of pulling you through that process of learning the game through narrative. Look, we tried some of that with Icarus, I think, to a degree of success. The mission approach, I think you never want to be in a position where you're selling something that people need but they don't want. And that's what I think that people don't realize, is that when you make a game, you need to make enough money to be able to afford to make 3 or 4 or even 5 other games, because most of those other games are going to crash and burn before the community even hears about them. And I know for me, this is ironic considering what people say me abandoning games. I don't want to work on a game that we won't finish. No matter what comes. So even with Stationeers, even though we don't make usually anywhere near enough as what we're spending on making it, it doesn't matter. When we start a game, we make the game. And we don't just slap a 1.0 on it and call it finished. We see it through to its inevitable end. That's another thing that I get really confused about. People go like, I can't believe so long as, why are the devs still developing the game? It's like, do you just want people to just slap a 1.0 on and call it done? I'd rather, it's like, if RimWorld keeps getting developed forever, that's great for me. So I think there's huge issues as we've got as an industry, and I suppose the one silver lining about the massacre that's going on at the moment is I think that ultimately it's going to make our industry have to answer some of these questions. What we have now is not sustainable, and we're going to see a heap of video game studios go under. Hopefully, most of the survivors retain their independence rather than just getting bought up by a subscription service. And
the big names that time and time again letting us down with some of the AAA titles that are being released of late that just aren't.
Yeah, but to be fair, they get punished for trying to do new stuff. And they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars. So they're sort of penalized for trying to take risks. So, and again, this isn't anyone to blame.
So could you give an example of something like that?
The Division. So I got to meet the Division team when very on, and I think they wanted me to go even talk at their studio. And I actually got to play some early versions of the Division at E3 long before, and that game just got massacred as the development went on. And so I think that, that's the challenge that these AAA studios take. It's like I played Starfield, and I have notes. Okay, I have notes on Starfield, but that's the challenge that a company like Bethesda face. They're spending so much money that they unfortunately get backed into this corner of having to play it safe. So they're trying not to play it too safe. That's the reason that I hate sequels, because you just end up peeing off everybody.
Yeah. No, 100% agree on that one there. Now, a quick one from Good Cluck. First person or third person, or he actually worded it is he a first person perspective Chad?
I mean, a first person is the way the games should be played. So I play a lot of Space Engineers. Space Engineers is probably my second all time, other than DayZ in terms of hours. And Space Engineers, I like to just play it in first person. There's another game, Stormworks. I'll tend to play it with only third person enabled in certain situations. Having said that, I like seeing my character, so I do think that sometimes being able to access third person makes me feel more connected to my character, but I'll tend to mostly play in first person for sure.
I have seen a lot of people, especially role players, do bring that up, that the third person. I just think it's great to have the choice. But yeah, I'm with you in that first
Again,
person.
I think if you're making a PvP game, you have to be able to unpack a whole bunch of the antisocial behavior issues, and I just don't think we have the ability to do that in the video game industry yet. So that's something we've been long-term wanting to work towards in the studio. That was why we started with a PvE game, to try and get the basics right with Icarus, figure out our processes before we move on to bigger stuff.
What did you think of Scum's novel idea with solving the third-person peeking mechanic?
Yeah, I mean, it's about trying stuff and seeing what works. I don't have the numbers, so I don't really know how effective it was.
Yep. Now, this one was from Stud Muffin. I gave you the heads up on this one before the interview started. Would you accept a full paid dinner date with a stud?
I don't know whether I'd accept a paid one. I think it's a challenge for people to accept when someone really is. And I usually try and warn potential dates out. If it comes down to them or the game, or even me and the game wins. So the work wins. Unfortunately for me, I'm like one of those sea captains. I'm married to the sea. I'm obsessed with it to the point where it's almost like a sickness. So that does not make for a very accepting partner environment.
I love that answer. Well played. Good luck again. Where is the sweet spot in balancing the challenge of a survival in an MMO game like DayZ with unhindered risk of death via PvP? As in, where do you draw the line to prevent PvP-focused players from dominating amongst survival-focused players, which seems to me to be a reason for the large variance in community server focus, and as such, dilutes the player population into those who shall KOS and those shall not. Less functional games, less ammo, or easier survival?
I think that's where, so at the studio, we have the philosophy that games are played, not made. So when we ship Icarus, and I've gotten pretty mad about this in the past, we do not ship it with the dev cheats enabled. And in fact, when the developers are playing the game, there's a difference between playing the game and testing it. You test something to make sure it works, but then you play the game. To play the game, you have to play for 20 hours in one run through. You have to experience the game in the same way, and then not everybody is going to gel with the game on the dev team. You have to get hooked to it. It has to be Sunday night and you want to keep playing it even though you know you're going to be really tired. So you have to rely on those, we call them champions in the team, who got addicted to the game. You have to get addicted to your own product if you want to be able to have any hope of balancing the stuff you're talking about. And even then, it's very difficult. So, and then you also have to listen to the community, but not do what they say. You need to listen to them, and you need to refine that, enriched uranium almost. And that's very difficult. But I think it starts with, you really have to play your game, which means you have to devote time in your day, a week, to playing the game, to really experiencing it and feeling it. So I think that's not a science. I'm all about data. We're all about data at the studio, but that one does not come down to data. It comes down to feeling and vision. Which is why I removed pistols at one point in DayZ mod. So you started with nothing, and that was very controversial. But I still think that was the way to go. It was about pulling that experience out.
I do too. Like, it created as well so many great encounters. You know, the freshie with the stick. That was the meta item there for years. Just to go and get yourself a stick, and sadly the bow. We're still waiting for that to come back. But for those who knew how, you'd go and make an improvised bow.
I think if I was making a sequel to DayZ, I would want to expand it out more into phasing it, because I think you get to pull on that a bit more. So I'd want to explore. Phil Spencer, if you're, I'm available. I would want to start. I would want to start with when the outbreak happened, and then play that through. later on. I think as the zombie apocalypse is starting, I think is a very interesting area.
I liked Dead Matter's approach to that. I know there's a lot of issues around Dead Matter, the game, but again, I've been critical, but at the same time, I still hope that they manage to succeed, because I liked that as the cycle of the server goes on, things start to deteriorate, but it starts almost at the beginning of the outbreak, and then things start breaking down and deteriorating. I thought that was a great novel idea. Something a bit different.
It's a cool idea, but again, like, the hard part is how you pull all these things together, and that's the really challenging thing. And again, I look around and I think people are trying to achieve very short-term success. I'm devoting my whole career to it, and I think there's it's most likely that I'll fail. So that's how difficult the task is. This is a 20 or 30 year task to deliver on this stuff, that involves growing not just yourself but as a team. And I think people just vastly underestimate the change that's required in the industry to deliver on this.
Yep. Now, Wobo, I'm certain you know who Wobo is. His question for you was, do you have any regrets regarding DayZ?
Of course, lots. I mean, we don't have enough time to go through. Probably the biggest one was really obsessing about solving the hacking, and that delaying the project, and then forcing us to make everything server-side, which meant that we had to cut down the amount of zombies, because previously the zombies it's quite clever, actually, and it was a novel idea of mine and the mod about how to run a lot of the zombies on client computers. So yeah, that was probably we should have just not dealt with the hacking through server-side authority, but actually just create a lot of community tools and let the communities run the server. That's what works with Minecraft. Give the server owners the ability to deep dive and data dive and figure out who is doing bad stuff, and then let the communities manage the bans or whitelists and stuff like that.
Septic Falcon. Would you have done anything different regarding DayZ? We sort of touched on this, but I'll ask the question for him because it's Septic Falcon and he's a legend.
Yeah, I mean, he's great. I think we're in the same few discords. I think absolutely there's a lot of stuff that I'd do differently. I think that's true for every project that I ever do. I would probably have pushed, and I think Marek would have said yes, about really form a separate team with a different view. I know when I left Bohemia, I gave Marek two pieces of what I thought were advice. One is make what I call DayZ Arena, which would have just been PUBG. I saw that the minute I saw Survivor games, I really knew that there was something.
I was trying to avoid that. They hate me talking about Survivor games, Dean. I think it is the biggest loss for DayZ. Like, a lot of people don't realize just how big Survivor games was back in the day. It was one of the big things behind Twitch blowing up even.
Well, that was my idea, was DayZ Arena, and the other one was that the next Armour should be an online, focused purely on online play. Yep. So yeah, I think in hindsight I probably would have pushed that a bit more while I was there.
Mm-hmm. And infamously, apparently, they knocked Brendan Green back with PUBG as well, is what gets said. But yeah, you can't dwell too much on what's in the past. As the famous poet Pumbaa said, you got to put your behind in your past. Mm-hmm. Scalespeeder Gaming, another legend of the DayZ community. Hi, Dean. What's your favourite way of playing DayZ and why?
I'm definitely a survivor, so I like to go around and team up and help people. I don't like to just shoot people randomly. I wanted to be in a scary environment where that was the case. So I'm really interested in the idea of unbalanced experiences, so asynchronous gameplay design. I'm not interested in synchronous gameplay design where two teams are equal and you just sort of see who fights it out. That's my big problem with World of Warships, actually. I feel like my kill-death ratio is like 49.9%, and it's about getting your kill-death ratio to 50.02,
and
me, I'm at
48%.
So that's whereas I like to just lose all the time to make that one time win. Like I used to play a lot of Company Heroes, and I would play it with friends where we'd be on the same team fighting the AI set to expert, and we would lose like most of the time. I just finished playing Foxhole, this latest side, and I joined the losing side, and I played right till the end last night. Their wars last a month, and
Wow.
I loved just losing. That's the terrifying part of it. So yeah.
Failure is a learning experience. Skullspeeder also asks the $1 million question. I'm certain you've heard this before, but also, I really, really want to enjoy and play Icarus, but could you please tell me how to reconcile the fact that in Icarus, I travel hundreds of light years in an advanced spaceship and run around in an alien world in a futuristic spacesuit and helmet, yet I'm crafting wood and stone tools, weapons, and structures?
Actually, so there's two criticisms of Icarus. One of them is, why are you wearing a helmet when there's oxygen? And that one we wanted to remove pretty early on. I realized that was a dumb idea. That was my idea. But it was just going to cost us a fortune to redo the characters to do it. So that's just one of those things we're just committed to, unfortunately. But the second one is, actually, I'd recommend they go out and read Peter F. Hamilton's books, particularly the Nightstone trilogy. I think the reality is, when we go to places like Mars or wherever, we're going to build with in situ resources. Like we are. It's too difficult to send all that stuff. So I think actually that's not a criticism I agree with it. Also, I think the best parts of survival games is the start. And that was what we wanted to do with Icarus. And I still think it was a great idea. It just was selling people what they need, but not what they wanted, at least now. And being early is just as bad, if not worse, than being late. It's probably worse than being late. So, I think we were too early. I genuinely think that survival... Valheim does this by stealth. And actually, someone pointed this out in a YouTube video, that what we were asking people to do is what happens in Valheim. Every time you want to go to a new boss, you have to build a new base. In fact, every time those guys release a new update, they tell you to start a new game, which people do. Yep. But yeah, so I think that I definitely think that I actually personally really like the idea that you're going back to building stuff with wood and stone and that, and I think that the reality is, when we go to these places, we are going to end up doing that.
That actually makes sense. I like that answer. Now, I don't know if you realise, but there's actually another couple of DayZ podcasts out there now as well. This game you created that's 10 years old has got more podcasts now about it than ever. And one of them is the team at Friendly DayZ Podcast. And the question that they wanted to put to you was, what's one thing that you wanted to create in DayZ that was really difficult or impossible to implement, but that's also much easier to build today?
Well, definitely the vehicles. I think the vehicles were a key thing that I wanted to have in, but the obsession over hacking definitely made that we just didn't have the time. So that was the big one. And then it was probably being able to do some of the scale building and that. But even then, with the RV engine, modern engines just really struggle with some of that stuff. So you've got to build that from the ground up.
Yep. Bit of a fun one from them here as well. Imagine you wake up one day and find yourself in a post-apocalyptic world that closely resembles DayZ. You could choose one real-world celebrity and one DayZ content creator to be your survival buddies. Who would you pick and why?
Wait, one what? Sorry, one real celebrity and
one real-world celebrity and one DayZ content creator. Who would you pick and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. I definitely pick Sacriel. So Sacriel is good at all the things that I am not good at. He can also explain stuff really well. He's taught me how to play a lot of games, so I feel like a lot of the knowledge that I have, that I don't have, he would be able to fill in those gaps well. In terms of real-world celebrity, who would I pick? I think you've got to think about team cohesion is a lot more important. So I think Sacriel would take things quite seriously, like I would. So we'd want to pick a celebrity that takes things quite seriously as well. I think that's a problem, because the kind of people who are going to be celebrities are not going to want to, they're naturally quite outgoing people, so they might not take it super seriously. I don't know. Do you have any recommendations? I'm struggling on the celebrity front.
Look, the way you're talking about that right now, this might throw some people, but everything I've heard about Tom Cruise is that guy goes absolutely balls deep with getting into something. Like I
He
just
does the stunts, right?
I just did a video. Watched a video talking about what's his name? Lex Friedman, the character he played in Tropic Thunder, and the whole idea was that he was doing hip hop dance classes. Tom Cruise was doing hip hop dance classes, and he wanted to incorporate it into a character. And I was like, that's some next level obsession with your craft when you're always looking to expand. And yeah.
Did you see that End of the World movie that the Pineapple Express guys made?
No. Oh, yes. Yes. With the tape on the wall when, that'll fix it. And poor old, the girl from Hogwarts, from Harry Potter. And yeah, she thinks they're all talking about doing terrible things to her and they're not. And yeah, that was a good movie.
It's a they take themselves not seriously at all, and they're often all playing their own character, they are, but a fictionalized version of them. And Channing Tatum appears as a slave for.
Oh God, that was comedy gold.
So maybe that's it. Maybe we should pick a celebrity that we can just traumatize or something. I don't know. Have as yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Sada Plays. This was a good question. Why wasn't the hero bandit system put as a high priority in DayZ Standalone? As I feel that mechanic was at the core of what DayZ Mod was.
I agree, but I think it's one of those things. A bad mechanic around that is worse than no mechanic. Certainly, that's a key part of interest for me in the idea of asynchronous gameplay, taking two disparate and differently balanced groups and trying to get them to play together. But you also have to deal with antisocial. So I agree, but again, I think that's a problem that's going to take decades to solve, not weeks or months.
Minder, what's something you would have liked to have added to DayZ but has never made it?
I haven't played in a while, actually, so I'm not sure what's there now. I think more settlement mechanics would be what I'm very interested in. Which I think Project Zomboid, I just saw while I'm playing this, a bunch of friends of mine have been playing. Project Zomboid's just like the GOAT, I think the kids say, on that regard.
Yep. The craft.
Very cool dev team, actually, the Project Zomboid dev team.
Lad, who was one of my co-hosts, do you use the stuff you learned from DayZ in your future projects, and how does that experience influence your decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like aviation safety. A lot of our decisions are written in blood by mistakes. And, like I said, unfortunately, the video game market we're in now is, I think, single mistakes are costing entire studios. We didn't have that problem before. The margins are really bad. The costs are really high. So, we're just, unfortunately, so that means that you simply cannot, what is it? Those who ignore history are deemed to repeat it. I think it's worse than that, in that those who are who ignore history are, and the video game industry, are forced to relive a worse version of history. That's the reality we're facing now.
Final questions, Dean, and then I can let you get out of here. And they're from my good friend and one of my mentors for this game, Vigilante Gamer. Do you think you moved on at the right time? Did you have much more to give conceptually at that point?
I did, but I don't think I was very effective at it. I think I was doing a bad job at the end. I was just, I was just hung over from the project, and I think a smart person should know when to step aside. Yep. I hope I always have the ability to recognize when I'm no longer good for the thing that I'm doing. I think that in life, a lot of people don't do that. They don't know when to step aside. I actually think the bravest and smartest thing is knowing when you're no longer good for the thing that you're that you've birthed. And I think that's actually a very rare trait, someone who wears that. I think it's also a very misunderstood. It's not understood by the general population when someone realizes that they need to step aside.
That's actually a very good answer. I created a Facebook group for the battalion that I used to be in, and it's got I think 2,000 members in it, so quite a few. And I eventually realised that I'm 50 now, but the battalion is still going. There's a lot of young guys, and as much as I'm 50, and I like to think I'm still relatively in touch with the young guys, I realised I'm not the right person to be in charge of this group anymore. Because there's nothing worse than cringe old fellas spinning their boomer jokes, and I'm really bad for that. If I find something funny, I'll keep it doing it regardless of. But I know that annoys the crap out of the young folks. So I said to one of the young guys who's still serving, and I said, "Mate, I want to hand the group to you. I like your attitude," and I stepped away. And a lot of other people realised it had the same thoughts about you as you, Dean. In that, it was a good time to do it. Let the young guys take over and move the direction of the group forward, and it's quite good. You see that with some communities as well around DayZ, and that someone's vision. Okay, it's time for bring some fresh blood in. Otherwise,
I wish that wasn't the case, because I definitely think I had a lot more to give. But I think we play the cards as they are, not how we want them to be. And that's I think you've got to think about life like that, otherwise you're not going to get anywhere.
Vidge also asked, when you created the mod, you abandoned several game design conventions which would never have been accepted by a committee, executives, or probably even within a small team. I can only assume you were expecting a very limited appeal to a small audience?
Yes. I knew it was going to be successful, but it wasn't until a while later I knew just how much. And I think each time it hit its peak, I was sort of steadying myself for it to peak, and it didn't. But I think that's a lot of good ideas look really obvious in hindsight. That's why I'm just not interested in. I'm being serious when I say I want my next games to have a two difficulty modes, hardcore and quit. Maybe not quite that brutal, but I'm very interested in more hardcore play, the challenges, and maybe I just don't care anymore. I'd almost rather run the studio into the ground than make games that I don't want to play. But it's unfortunate, because I think we're heading into an environment that and we had to do a bit of this with Icarus, where we had to make some changes to the game because the game wasn't getting the customers, and that's unfortunate, because I think there's a lot of cool ideas I'd like to try that maybe just wouldn't be initially commercially viable.
Yep. We've had plenty of sandbox games for a long time now, but this was the first honest attempt at a sandbox of the human condition. Do you actually understand how profound this work is? Do you appreciate what effect it had on some players? It's kind of a rhetorical question, but he said he'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And we've touched on this a bit, but...
Yeah, I've been fortunate as a result of this to have a lot of academics reach out studying it. It's been studied quite a lot. Actually, I've got one of them here. A guy wrote a book called Treacherous Play. So this guy did it, I think, as part of his PhD, this book. So he talks about DayZ and EVE Online and stuff like that. So I've been quite lucky to talk to a number of different people about it.
Okay. His final comment, and it's probably a good way to, pardon me, wrap things up. Thank you for making my favourite game of all time and setting the stage for the most intense and rewarding experience I've had in gaming. And that's, I think, how a lot of people feel about it. DayZ, I said earlier about how, and it comes back to the comment you said, it's an anti-game, but, you spawn in, and unless you are aware of DayZ and how the game works, it's its own worst enemy at times, in that you literally have no idea, but there's something about it. It sinks its teeth into you. And I see this comment time and time again from people that they'll step away from the game. They'll get frustrated or whatever. They'll uninstall, like you said, that person sent you the email about. But then one day you'll be sitting there, and I think I had about a 1.5 year break from DayZ a while back. I was playing Scum for a bit just for something different, and PUBG. But I came back to it, and my passion and love is still there. And you look at people like the Running Man. He's been probably arguably one of the longest full-time content creators around this game, and it's a testament to what you came up with, that this game can last so long, and is still growing. You know, there's more content creators than ever. You know, Frankie on PC's back playing it again now, and the GOAT of it. What did you think of Frankie's videos back in the day?
I actually got to meet him at E3 once. He was lovely.
Yep.
Really nice. Really smart, actually, too.
Yeah. Yeah, he comes across that way. He's a very private individual. There's not a lot known about him, other than he went to Africa. He's a lawyer, and but yeah, he's a fascinating individual. And yeah, I think his videos were a massive part of the success of DayZ as well. Would you agree?
Definitely.
Yep. Dean, is there any plans for you for 10 years on the 16th of December?
Probably not. Again, I find, I mean, I don't know, people are just weird about, it's the same, I don't celebrate birthdays and they're arbitrary lengths of time. I think I'm probably like Captain Ahab, right? And recreating that experience you're talking about. I would be very disappointed if DayZ is the end of the story for me. But I think that's in terms of the best that I could do. Having said that, that's probably the most likely outcome, but that doesn't mean that I don't stop trying. So yeah, I think I see myself as that sort of Captain Ahab. You're familiar with Captain Ahab from Moby Dick? Yep. Yeah. So, but that's it. I think that's what I feel like I'm here to do. So whether or not I achieve the outcome, I am a brush, so there, or I paint.
You've already done what many people would consider their, I think it's magnum opus. They're a great, they're something that could be the greatest, but you're still aspiring for more, and that's you're not resting on your laurels that I did DayZ and wow.
Well, I don't think I'm aspiring. I think it's more like obsession. So, but that's like I say, the way I think about it, I am a brush, and therefore I paint. So.
I like that. Dean, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Thank you for DayZ. Any final comments you'd like to give anyone?
Nope. No, it's good. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, leave your comments down below. If you have a few $1 million laying around and you want to see Dean fund a hardcore or quit the game model, get in contact with him. His contact details are online.
Well, they can buy Icarus. They can buy Icarus and Stationeers.
And Stationeers. I have actually one last question. Have you heard about the DayZ movie?
I mean, I saw the news article, but that's about it.
Thoughts?
Well, I mean, I tried to put it together for a while. I'd written the basics of a hardcore miniseries that I wanted to see happen for it, but never sort of got the time to get it off ground because I just got really annoyed with like how larger than life everything is, and I wanted to see. It was written around the leftovers of a small New Zealand Army platoon. At the start of a outbreak, and they're based overseas, and they're trying to get back to their family. So I started out trying to write it as a novel, but realized I didn't have the chomp to write a novel, and found that it was easier to try and write a screenplay.
Awesome.
But that's not the movie. I wouldn't make a movie. If I was going to do it, I'd make a miniseries.
Yeah,
that's me personally.
Well, when I spoke to them a while back, they actually said that's still something that they may consider doing. It's not 100% either way at the moment, but yeah. Again, Dean, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for watching. It's been quite a long interview. It was only meant to go for about an hour, Dean, but he's been very gracious, and 2.5 hours we've been going, Dean, if you're wondering. But yeah, all the best, everyone, and we will see you in the next interview. Ciao for now.